The helicopter came in low and hard, riding the crosswind off the eastern ridge like the pilot wanted to get rid of it as fast as possible. It touched down on the Black Ridge landing pad with a sound like a fist hitting a table, one decisive impact, and the rotors were still spinning when the cargo door opened and she stepped out. One duffel bag, one rifle case, a face that told nobody anything. The soldiers standing at the edge of the pad had been expecting someone else. Not a specific person, just different, larger, older. The kind of face that accumulates damage visibly, the way leather does. What they got was a woman who looked like she might work in a government office, if the government office required you to carry a rifle case that had clearly been through things the carrier wasn't going to discuss. Private Denny Rusk watched her cross the landing pad and nudged Corporal Ferris with his elbow. "That's the reinforcement." Ferris squinted. "Has to be wrong." Command said specialist sniper. Then Command made a mistake somewhere. She walked past both of them without looking at either. The rifle case swung at her side with the ease of something she had been carrying for years. Sergeant Logan Pierce was waiting at the perimeter gate with his arms crossed, and the particular expression he got when something irritated him before noon. He was 34 years old, 2 tours behind him, a service record that required a thick folder, and a way of occupying space that suggested he had never once questioned whether he belonged in it. "Corporal Hale," he said. "Sergeant Pierce." She set the rifle case down. Not gently, not roughly, just efficiently. "Who briefs me on the defensive setup?" "I do." He looked at the case. Canvas exterior, worn aluminum reinforcements, latches rubbed to bare silver from years of use. "What's your primary?" "Modified M24, long-range precision rifle." "Deployments?" "3." He waited for more. She didn't offer any. "Follow me," he said. Black Ridge Outpost sat at 8,400 feet in a high-terrain corridor that the military had decided was strategically important enough to occupy, but not important enough to properly supply. The main structure was a converted storage facility with reinforced walls and narrow windows. Around it, sandbagged emplacements, 2 observation posts on elevated ground, a motor pool holding 3 working vehicles and one that had been dead since August. 31 personnel. 72 hours until scheduled evacuation. In theory, the hard part was done. Nora Hale did not work in theory. She moved through the camp the way she always moved through new terrain, quietly, incrementally, building the picture from pieces rather than accepting the one she'd been handed. The perimeter was arranged with reasonable competence. 2 emplacements had dead zones that the planners had apparently decided to live with. The eastern observation post had excellent coverage of the valley approach below, and a significant blind angle to the northeast ridge. She stood at the base of the eastern OP and looked at that ridge for a long time. It rose sharply at 922 meters out. She had paced the angle from 3 reference points and averaged the result. The crest ran northwest to southeast along a natural rock formation that created a series of protected folds just below the skyline. From the right position on that crest, a crew-served weapon would have plunging fire across sectors 3 and 4 and the motor pool, unobstructed, uncontested from any current emplacement. She opened her notebook and started writing. Pierce walked her through the defensive plan that afternoon with professional thoroughness, standing at the operations map and working through each sector in order. She listened to everything. When he finished, she said, "Has anyone run ballistics from the northeast ridge to the center of the outpost?" He looked at her. "The ridge is 900 meters out. Getting crew served up there in darkness would take equipment and planning we have no indicators for." "What indicators are you tracking?" "Valley movement, access route traffic, radio intercepts." "Village patterns?" A pause. "Small, but there." "What about them?" She pulled out the notebook. "The village at Grid November Whiskey 44 has had 0 foot traffic on its eastern route for 71 hours. That route leads directly to the base of the Ridge Trail." She turned the notebook so he could see the entries. "I tracked movement patterns on approach. 3 days ago, normal traffic. 2 days ago, reduced. Yesterday and today, nothing." He looked at the notebook. He looked at her. "I'll flag it for Major Kane." "I'd like to flag it myself." "I'll handle it," he said, and that was the end of it. He didn't handle it. She found that out 2 hours later from the shape of the afternoon watch briefing, which she overheard from the mess table where she was eating alone. The ridge wasn't mentioned once. Ferris sat down across from her with the expression of someone about to share something they found entertaining. Heard you gave Pierce a lecture on threat assessment. I asked him questions. He said you calculated the wind. I observed the wind. The calculations came after. Ferris picked up his fork. Where were you posted before? 4th Reconnaissance Battalion. Combat postings? 3. A lot of shooting? She looked at him. That's what snipers do. He smiled. It was the kind of smile that didn't carry warmth. You know what Pierce is saying about you? She waited. That you probably saw too many highlight reels and thought that's what real combat looks like. He shrugged. No offense. Which part was meant to not be offensive? Come on, we've been running this posting for 5 months. You've been here. He glanced at an imaginary watch. 5 hours. The ridge has been there the whole time. Nobody's touched it. Nobody that you've seen. Right. He pointed the fork at her. See, that's the thing. That's a lot of assumption for someone who just got off a helicopter. Threat assessment is always assumption. The question is whether the probability justifies the precaution. And your probability? She looked at him steadily. High enough that I'm not going to sleep well tonight. He laughed and went back to his food. Across the room, 2 other soldiers were watching. One said something she couldn't hear. Both smiled. She finished eating without tasting any of it. She spent the rest of the afternoon on the roof of the main structure, the highest point in the outpost, with unobstructed sightlines northeast. Nobody had told her she could be there. Nobody had told her she couldn't. She lay flat with her spotting scope, and she watched the ridge. 4 hours. Nothing moved. The wind shifted at 13:47, exactly as she had predicted from the morning pattern. She noted the time and the direction in the notebook. The afternoon light fell across the rock face in long orange columns and collected in the crevices she had marked as potential staging positions. At 15:31, a large corvid left its perch on the rock face 200 meters below the ridge crest. No wind change, no visible cause. It left with the urgency of something startled rather than something that had chosen to fly. She wrote down the time, the position, the bearing. At 16:15, she descended and walked directly to the operations room. Kane was reviewing evacuation manifests. Major. She knocked on the open frame. 2 minutes, sir. He gestured to the chair. She gave him everything. Village patterns, ridge geometry, ballistic analysis. The bird at 1531. No theater. She had rehearsed it to be under 4 minutes. The bird detail pushed it to 4.5. When she finished, Kane looked at the notebook for a moment before he spoke. Corporal Hale, what you're describing would require significant enemy resources and planning. Yes, sir. And your physical evidence is traffic patterns and a displaced bird. And ballistic calculations, terrain analysis, and wind data gathered over 6 hours of direct observation, sir. He folded his hands. He had the careful manner of a man who chose words deliberately, which made him harder to push against than someone who just said no. I hear you, but we're 72 hours from a clean exfil. Regional Command has rated this corridor as reduced threat since the activity 6 weeks ago. I'm not restructuring the defensive plan based on a precautionary analysis. Sir, I know what quiet can mean. He said it gently. That gentleness was the wall. You've only just arrived. I'm going to ask you to trust the preparation we've built here. He slid the notebook back across the table. I'm assigning you to the Western Observation Post. Good sight lines, important coverage. The Western OP had no angle on the ridge whatsoever. Yes, sir, she said. Pierce found her at 1800 setting up in the Western OP. He leaned against the ladder below and watched her adjust her shooting rest. Kane told me he spoke with you. He did. He said you were thorough. Pierce paused. Look, your analysis isn't bad, but you need to understand the culture here. These guys have been in the field for 5 months. They're not going to take a warning seriously from someone who's been on post for an afternoon. The enemy doesn't care how long I've been here. No. But my soldiers do. He shifted his weight. If I run your warning up the chain and nothing happens, I've burned your credibility for every shift until evac. She set the rest down and looked at him directly for the first time in the conversation. And if you don't run it? Then we have a quiet night and we go home in 3 days. She turned back to the scope. Let's hope that's what happens. He stood there a moment longer, and she could feel him deciding whether to say something else. He decided against it. She heard him go down the ladder and across the gravel. She settled in and opened the notebook and began writing. Private Yolanda Marsh was the exception to the texture of the camp's response to Nora's arrival. 23, sharp-eyed, the kind of person who got overlooked in quieter ways. She brought coffee to the Western OP at 2100 without being asked, climbing the ladder with a cup in each hand, and handed one over without making it a moment. "How'd it go with Kane?" she asked, settling on the top step. "Productively," Nora said. Marsh made a sound that understood exactly what that meant. "Pierce has been running this post since month 2, Marsh said. "He's not stupid. He just gets attached to the plan when the plan is what's holding everyone together. Plans are only as good as their assumptions." "I know." Marsh looked out at the western approach, dark and still. "What do you actually think is out there?" Nora considered the question honestly. "Someone patient. Someone who has been preparing for longer than the threat assessment accounts for. And I think 72 hours is exactly long enough for something timed to coincide with our exfil window." Marsh was quiet. Then, "I'll run radio checks every 20 minutes tonight instead of 30. "That would help." Marsh climbed down without making it into anything. Nora appreciated that more than she could have said. At 0147, the village at November Whiskey 44 made a sound. A dog barked. One burst of it, sharp and alarmed, then stopped. The silence that followed was not the same silence as before. Nora had not been asleep. She had been in a resting state, flat on the platform, eyes closed, running ballistic tables in her head. The dog sound brought her fully alert in under 2 seconds. She rolled to the scope. The ridge was dark. The quarter moon threw thin silver light that deepened shadows rather than softened them. She began horizontal sweeps from bottom to top, slow and even, the way she had been trained. On the third pass, she found it. 2 figures on the upper trail, moving at the specific pace of people following a rehearsed route in darkness. Not rushed, not cautiously slow, but the steady tempo of repetition. One of them was carrying something long and horizontal across both arms. She pressed transmit. "Western OP to Ops. I have movement on the northeast ridge, 2 or more personnel, upper trail, bearing 047. One carrying what appears to be crew-served equipment." Static. Then the duty operator. "Say again, Western OP?" She said it again. Same words, no elevation in her voice. A pause. Then Pierce, not the operator. "Copy, Hale. I'll advise." "They're above the tree line," she said. "If they reach the crest in the next 12 minutes, the Eastern OP loses coverage, and they'll have full elevation on sectors 3 and 4 before the watch rotation finds them." "Hales, Sergeant, I'm not theorizing." She heard him breathe, heard somewhere behind him, boots on concrete. "Hold your position," he said. "I'm coming to you." She was already settling behind the rifle. He made it in 4 minutes. Climbed without speaking, came up beside her, took the spotting scope she held out, and pointed toward the crest. He was quiet a long time. 2, he said. "At least. I think there are support elements at the tree line. The movement pattern suggests staged positioning." He lowered the scope. She could see him working through it, recalculating something he had been confident about. "If I restructure watch coverage to face the ridge, I strip the valley approach for 40 minutes during the transition." "The valley approach isn't the primary threat." "You don't know that." "I know the ridge is about to become one." She kept her voice level. It cost her. "Logan, if something heavy goes up there and we don't have a counter position, we cannot suppress it from any existing emplacement. The geometry doesn't work. They'll have full plunging fire on this outpost." He looked at the ridge, then at her, then at the ridge. "I'll call Kane." "You have 8 minutes before they reach the crest." He was already on the radio. But Kane's response took 90 seconds. He approved 1 additional soldier to augment the Eastern OP. He declined to restructure watch coverage during the transition window. He cited the valley approach. She stood still and listened to Pierce relay it. "1 soldier," she said. "That's the call." She breathed carefully through her nose. "The Eastern OP is already blind to the upper ridge. 1 additional observer doesn't change the geometry." "I know." "Move me to the Eastern OP. Pierce looked at her. Your assignment is Western. My assignment is a position with no angle on the developing threat. Request the move. He can say no twice. He looked at her for a long moment. The darkness was deep between them, the camp noise distant below. Stay here. Don't move without my clearance. He started for the ladder. And Hale, she looked at him. If you're wrong about this, I know, she said. The clearance didn't come. At 0218, Pierce's voice over the radio. Hale, Western OP, you're staying put. Valley approach needs the coverage. She clicked transmit twice, said nothing else. She thought about what she knew. She thought about the two figures on the upper trail. She thought about what crew-served fire from that crest would do to Sector 3 in the first 30 seconds. Then she did the thing she was built for. She settled behind the rifle, adjusted the scope for the range she had already calculated from this position. Not the 922 to the crest from the eastern OP, but 1,140 from here, through an angled approach she had spent the last 2 hours working out. She identified 3 firing solutions. None of them were ideal. All of them were viable. She began running wind calculations in the notebook. At 0251, the eastern perimeter exploded. Not a single blast. A sequence. The first charge took out the primary emplacement. The second, half a second behind it, caught the secondary. Then a third, somewhere beneath the surface, something pre-placed that sent a column of earth and timber straight up into the night sky. The compression wave reached the western OP as a physical thing. She felt it in the deck boards, in her sternum, in the back of her teeth. The radio came apart. Contact east. Contact east. Medic. I need a medic at... Suppressing fire. Where is the ridge lit up. 3 positions. Interlocking fields of fire. The crew-served gun was not on the crest. It was just below it, offset to use the terrain fold as protection, while maintaining full plunging fire on the outpost interior. Exactly where she had said. Exactly as she had calculated. She pressed transmit. Western OP to command. Visual on 3 ridge fire positions. Crew served. Upper crest offset northeast. Requesting clearance to engage. Screaming on the radio. Crosstalk she had to mentally push through. Then Pierce, and his voice had an edge she had not heard before. All elements. Eastern emplacement is down. Sector 3 is taking direct... Pierce! Everything she had went into keeping her voice flat. I have the positions. Give me clearance. 4 seconds of static. Negative, Hale. Hold your position. Command protocol. Logan. Hold your position. She set the transmit key down. She looked through the scope. She could see Sector 3. She could see what was happening to the men inside it. She picked up the notebook and looked at the numbers she had written, the ballistic tables and the wind data and the grid references, and then she set it down. She waited. Because the order was the order. Sector 3's defensive line buckled. She heard it in the radio traffic. The shift from coordinated to desperate, the frequency change that meant squads were no longer holding positions but falling back from them. A gap opened in the perimeter that had not existed 90 seconds ago. Sector 3 is down. Pierce's voice was barely controlled. Sector 3 is down, I need... She pressed transmit. Logan. She made her voice as calm as she had ever made anything. The machine gun on the ridge is what's doing this. Give me clearance and I will shut it down right now. 6 seconds. You don't have the angle from Western. I have been working this solution for 40 minutes. 3 firing positions, calculated from this OP, all viable. She breathed once. Trust me, once. Right now. 7 seconds of static. In the background, she heard men screaming. She heard a mortar round hit somewhere inside the wire. Then, cleared hot. All clearances, Hale. Do what you can. She was already on the first target. Wind, 8 kilometers per hour, northeast, holding steady. Range to primary position, 1,140 meters. She had adjusted for this number 20 minutes ago. She exhaled halfway. Let the rest go. The first shot broke open the night. She cycled the bolt without watching where it landed. The motion was below conscious thought, pure repetition from 10,000 rounds downrange, and shifted to the second position in the sequence she had built. Wind unchanged, range consistent. 4-meter elevation differential between target 1 and target 2. Negligible at this distance, but not zero. She pressed the trigger. The machine gun went quiet. Not paused. Not interrupted. Stopped. The third shot was the one that mattered most to her professionally. The command position, the place where whoever was orchestrating this had to be standing to maintain line of sight to all 3 fire elements simultaneously. She had found it at 1612 in the afternoon light, a gap in the upper rocks, slightly west of the crest, where the terrain offered both cover and the visual angle needed to coordinate. She had marked it as the priority because the people who planned things were always more valuable than the people who executed them. Range, 1,160 meters. Wind shifting slightly, 9 kilometers now, the same northeast bearing, small enough to adjust for without changing position. She recalculated. 2 seconds. 1 click of elevation. Fired. The echo came back slower from this angle, then silence from the ridge. Not the silence of a pause, the silence of something organized that was no longer. Pierce's voice came across the radio, and it was barely recognizable as the same man she had been arguing with for 6 hours. Hale, report. 3 shots, primary machine gun crew neutralized, command position engaged. She scanned the ridge through the scope. The organized suppression is broken. You'll have secondary elements, individual shooters, possible mortar crew on the reverse slope. But the coordinated attack is done. A long silence. How? He said it without the question mark, like he was processing something his brain was still catching up to. I've been running the solution since 0218, she said. When you told me to stay put. She heard him breathing. Keep the ridge suppressed, he said. Anything moves up there. I'm watching. She was. Tugged. The next 40 minutes were the sharpest of her life. The scope made a clean circle of the world, and inside that circle, there were only distances and wind and the arithmetic of where a bullet needed to travel. She found the mortar crew on the reverse slope. She had predicted they'd be there, repositioning after the primary assault broke down. 2 targets, 90 seconds apart. The mortar did not fire again. She found a secondary shooting position on the eastern face and engaged it before it became active. 1 round. At 0347, Kane's voice came over the radio. Steady. The composure was deliberate. She could hear the effort in it. All elements. This is actual. The primary attack on our eastern perimeter has been broken. We are consolidating. All sectors. Report status. The reports came in. Sector 1, functional. Sector 2, functional. Sector 3, 2 positions destroyed. 3 personnel casualties, sector holding, sector 4 functional. Motor pool, 1 vehicle damaged. Then, Western OP, Corporal Hale report. Rifle expended 7 rounds, machine gun crew neutralized. Command position engaged and inactive. Mortar crew on the reverse slope is down. Secondary position on the eastern face was engaged before active. The ridge is quiet, sir. She paused. I'd recommend augmenting the eastern OP at first light, but right now it's not active. A long pause. Copy, Corporal. Another pause. Good shooting. She didn't respond. There wasn't anything to say to that. Pierce came to the western OP at 0420. She heard him on the ladder and kept her eye on the scope. She was going to watch the ridge until the sun confirmed what she thought she had done. He came up and stood beside her and looked at the same darkness. For a minute, neither of them said anything. 7 rounds, he said finally, at 1,100 meters. In the dark. 1140 on the primary, 1160 on the command element. In the dark, he said again. The quarter moon helped some. He was quiet a moment. Then, we lost Okonkwo and Fairbanks. Sector 3. When the gun came in from the ridge before you, he stopped. Before you were cleared. She absorbed it. Rusk has a frag wound, shoulder and leg. Priority evac. He put his hands on the rail and looked out at the valley. He was telling jokes about you at dinner. I know. I should have listened to you this morning, at the briefing, at the OP. His voice was flat with it. I don't have a way to make that into something else. She looked at him. What was on his face wasn't the kind of guilt that wanted to be forgiven. It was the harder kind that knows there's nothing to forgive it with. Grieve later, she said. We still have 68 hours. She turned back to the ridge. The sky was beginning to change in the east. Not light yet, just the absence of the deepest dark. The first suggestion that night was finite. She watched it come. Below her the camp was quiet, with the specific quiet of people who had learned overnight what quiet could cost. And somewhere past the ridge, past the tree line, past the distance her scope could reach, something that had failed once was already calculating how to try again. The dawn came in cold and gray and indifferent to what had happened under it. Nora stayed on the western OP platform until the sun cleared the eastern ridgeline completely. Not the suggestion of sun, not the preliminary light, but the actual disk of it sitting above the terrain and casting hard shadows she could use for reference. Only then did she take her eye from the scope. She rolled onto her back and looked at the sky and let her body register what it had been holding for the last 6 hours. Her right shoulder ached from the stock. Her lower back was stiff from the cold deck boards. Her eyes felt like they had sand in them. She sat up and started breaking down the shooting position. Below her the camp was doing what camps did after a bad night. Moving, but not normally. The difference was in the pace and the quality of the silence between sounds. Tools being picked up and put down. Voices kept low without any instruction to keep them low. The particular weight that settled over a place where people had died, and everyone who remained was quietly doing the arithmetic of how close the number had come to being larger. She descended the ladder at 0542 with the rifle case in one hand and her notebook in the other. The gravel of the main track was marked in 2 places with the rust-brown stain of dried blood that the morning chill had preserved. She walked around both without looking at them for longer than necessary. The mess was empty except for Marsh, who was sitting at the far end of a table with both hands wrapped around a cup, staring at nothing in particular. She looked up when Nora came in. "You should eat something," Marsh said. "I will." "I'm not saying it to be nice. You were up all night and you burned through." Marsh stopped. She looked at the rifle case. "How many rounds did you fire?" 7. Marsh absorbed this. 7 rounds. "Yes." "And the ridge is quiet." Nora set the case down and moved to the food line. What was available at 0542 was limited. Ration components, some bread that was 2 days old, hot water for instant coffee. She took all of it. For now. Marsh watched her carry the tray back to the table. "Okonkwo used to get here first every morning," she said, "before anyone else. He'd make the coffee and drink half the pot before the first watch rotation came in." She looked at the coffee maker, which was a commercial-grade unit someone had requisitioned at month 2 because the instant packets weren't cutting it at this altitude. "I didn't know that was a thing I'd miss." Nora ate. There wasn't anything useful to say to that, so she didn't try. "What happens now?" Marsh asked. "We run the remaining 68 hours as carefully as possible, and we get everyone left out of here in one piece." "Do you think they'll try again?" Nora looked at her food. Thought about the answer honestly. They had a plan, and it didn't work the way they expected. That's 2 things that can happen next. They regroup and try something different before the exfil window closes, or they cut the loss and let us leave. She paused. The first option is more likely if whoever's running the operation has something to prove. The second is more likely if last night was expensive enough that the math stopped working. Which do you think it was? "I don't know yet." She drank the coffee. It was bad, but hot. "I need to see the damage I did on the ridge before I can make that call." Marsh looked at her steadily. "You're already thinking about the next one." "I'm always thinking about the next one." "Is that—" Marsh started, then reconsidered. "Does that ever stop?" Nora set the cup down. "Get some sleep," she said. "You've been on since midnight. Kane called a full personnel assembly at 700, which meant everyone not actively on watch standing in the main yard in the thin morning cold while he stood on the motor pool running board and looked at them. He was not a tall man, average height, average build, but he had a stillness that filled space, and when he spoke, people listened because he made it clear he expected to be listened to, and somehow that was enough. "Last night we took a significant hit," he said. He didn't frame it as anything other than what it was. 2 personnel killed in action, 3 wounded, 1 priority evacuation. Eastern perimeter sustaining structural damage to 2 emplacements. He paused. "I'm not going to tell you that was acceptable. It wasn't. I'm also not going to spend time on the post-mortem when we still have a job in front of us." He looked across the assembled faces. Nora was standing at the back. She had positioned herself there deliberately, not visible from the front, with a clear sightline to the eastern ridgeline over the heads of the people in front of her. Old habit. Exfil timeline has been moved up to T-minus 56 hours, Kane continued. Regional Command is aware of our situation. We have helicopter support on standby from T-minus 4. Between now and wheels up, our job is simple. Hold the perimeter, complete the equipment transfer, and get home. He stopped. What happened last night tells us the enemy's timeline, and ours are running in the same direction. That means the next 56 hours will not be quieter than the last 12. I want everyone clear on that going in. He stepped down from the running board. Assembly done. No theater, no inspiration, no effort to make anyone feel better than the situation warranted. Pierce caught her eye as the group broke apart. He tilted his head toward the operations room and she followed. The map wall looked different to her than it had yesterday. Same maps, same markings, but now some of the markings were wrong, and she could see exactly where they diverged from reality. Pierce stood at the northeast quadrant and looked at the ridge representation for a moment before he spoke. Regional ran a drone survey at 6:30. They got imagery of the upper ridge. He pulled a printed photograph from the folder on the table. Thermal imaging, low resolution, but readable. What you hit is what you said was there. She looked at the image. 3 distinct signatures on the ridge crest area, clustered in the pattern she had identified. 2 were definitively inert. The third was ambiguous. Possible heat residue from equipment rather than a body, the image not clean enough to confirm. Command position, she said, pointing to the third signature. I'm not certain on that one. Regional's assessment is 50-50 on whether the individual was hit or extracted before the image was taken. She set the photograph down. If they extracted him, the operation isn't over. I know. Whoever planned last night knew this terrain. The position selection, the equipment staging, the timing relative to our watch rotation, that's not improvised. If the planner got out, then we have someone out there who knows we disrupted his plan and has 56 hours to decide what to do about it. Pierce pulled the photograph back. I've already flagged it to Kane. What did he say? He said to tighten the OP rotation and get you into the eastern post. Pierce looked at her. Effective immediately. Eastern OP is yours until exfil. She nodded. He also said... Pierce stopped. Something crossed his face that wasn't quite discomfort, but was adjacent to it. He's putting your field analysis in the official after-action report, verbatim, including the part where he and I declined to act on it. She looked at him. It was his call, Pierce said. I agreed with it. I know, for what it's worth. He folded the photograph and put it back. It's worth something, I think, to have it on record. It won't bring Okonkwo back. No. He said it quietly. It won't. She picked up the rifle case. I need access to the Eastern OP equipment storage. I want to reset the ranging stakes before the light changes. Marsh has the keys. She's running supply inventory in the... I know where she is. Nora moved to the door. Logan? He looked at her. The third thermal signature. Get Regional to run another pass at 1400 when the heat differential will be cleaner. If that position is still warm at 1400, it means someone came back to it after the attack. She paused. And if someone came back to it, they're still running the operation. Pierce picked up his radio before she finished the sentence. Words. The Eastern OP was a different structure than the Western. Larger platform, better overhead cover, a permanent ranging board someone had bolted to the north-facing rail 18 months ago and maintained with obsessive accuracy. Someone who had understood the terrain, whoever had built it, had positioned the platform at exactly the right height to clear the intervening rock formations and give a clean line to the northeast ridge approach. The right tool built for the right problem. She set up in 40 minutes, repositioned the shooting rest for her geometry, not the previous occupants, adjusted the ranging board's eastern markers to include the positions she had identified last night. The offset she had used from the western OP wouldn't be needed from here. The geometry was cleaner, but she marked the reference points anyway because redundancy in this work was not over caution. It was professionalism. Ferris came up at 0930 to check on the OP's ammunition storage. He climbed the ladder, looked at what she had done with the setup, and didn't say anything for a moment. You changed the rest height, he said finally. It was set for someone 4 inches taller than me. That was Kowalski. He was the last designated marksman we had before... Ferris stopped. Before last month. She looked at the ranging board. What happened to Kowalski? Ankle. Stepping out of the vehicle during a route clearance. Not even... He shook his head. Not even a contact, just bad ground. How long was he your designated marksman? 8 months. Ferris rested his forearms on the rail and looked out at the ridge. He was good. Not like... He stopped again. Not like last night, she said. I wasn't going to say it like that. It's accurate. Kowalski and I probably trained differently. She picked up the spotting scope and began the morning scan. Designated marksman and long-range precision sniper aren't the same job. What's the difference? Distance. Intent. Designated marksman supports a squad at 300 to 500 meters. What I do starts at 700 and goes as far as the conditions allow. She found the ridge crest in the scope and began her sweep. Last night, the primary position was 1,140 meters. Ferris was quiet. In darkness, she added, not to impress him, but because it was a relevant data point about the operational conditions. I know, he said. I've been doing the math since 0400. She kept her eye on the scope. What math? Trying to figure out how many times yesterday I said something that... He exhaled. Something stupid. About you not knowing what you were doing. Several times. Yeah. He picked up a loose bolt from the equipment shelf and turned it in his fingers. I keep coming back to the thing I said at dinner, about you watching too many action movies. She moved the scope slowly across the upper trail. You were repeating what Pierce said. I was adding to it. That's worse. The bolt clicked against the shelf rail. I do that. I find the current and I swim in it. It's easier than... He set the bolt down. It doesn't matter what it's easier than. Ferris? Yeah. I've been in 6 postings in 4 years. Every single one of them, the first week looks like this. He looked at her. People being idiots about you. People assuming what they assume. It's not always malicious. Sometimes it's just... She found something on the upper trail and went still. Held the scope steady for 8 full seconds before concluding it was a bird. Sometimes it's just pattern recognition misfiring. People's brains look for familiar categories, and I don't fit the familiar category for this job, so they pick the wrong one. That's a generous way to look at it. It's an accurate way to look at it. She lowered the scope and noted the time in her notebook. The malicious version is less common than people think. The lazy version is more common. Lazy is fixable. You just make them see something they can't explain away. Like 1,140 meters in the dark. That tends to do it, yes. Ferris almost smiled. It was different from the smile he'd had at dinner. Smaller, without the performance in it. The ammunition storage is fully stocked. You've got 200 rounds in the case below and another 50 in the rack. He moved to the ladder. I'll run a resupply check at 1,400. Bring water when you come, she said. The altitude dehydrates faster than people account for. Copy that. He descended. She went back to the scope. The 1,400 drone pass came back at 1447 with a result that confirmed what she had been afraid of since she'd seen the ambiguous thermal signature that morning. The third position on the ridge was warm, not body temperature warm, equipment warm. Something electronic, something powered, had been active at that location between the 0630 pass and the 1400 pass. Someone had gone back. Someone had retrieved equipment, or placed new equipment, or simply been there long enough to leave a thermal trace on instruments sensitive enough to catch it. She was in the Eastern OP when Pierce relayed the finding over the radio. She wrote the time in her notebook and underlined it once. Regional's interpretation? She asked. Observation post. They think whoever's running this moved from command and fire to command and observe. They're not done. They're reassessing. That's consistent with a competent planner who took a loss and wants to understand what went wrong before committing resources again. It's also consistent with someone who's going to try again in a different way. Yes, she said, it is. Pierce's voice had a quality on the radio she was learning to read. A slight compression in the consonants when he was working through something he didn't like. Kane's moving the 0200 watch rotation up to 0100. He's also adding a third OP position on the south face. Gives us coverage on the one approach we haven't been watching. The south face approach comes out behind the motor pool. Exactly. Who's running it? Marsh volunteered. Nora looked up from the notebook. Marsh is a radio operator. Marsh is also a qualified infantry soldier who hasn't fired a weapon in 4 months because she's been running the radio room. She says she needs to do something. A pause. Kane approved it. I'm going with them to set it up. She thought about this. Tell her to watch the drainage channel at the south base. It's the only covered approach on that face. If someone's coming from that direction, they'll use it. I'll tell her. And Logan? Yeah. The planner is still out there. Last night's operation was too well coordinated for one person, but the command element, the one that might have gotten out, that's one person making the key decisions. They know they failed. They know what stopped them. She paused. They're going to want to know who. A longer silence. You think they'll try to locate you? I think a competent planner who lost a machine gun crew and a command position to a single shooter they weren't expecting would want to find that shooter before they run the next operation. She looked out at the ridge. The third thermal signature might not just be reassessment, it might be reconnaissance. I'll run that up to Kane. Do it fast, she said. If they've already started looking, they're a step ahead of us. Oh, the afternoon had the specific quality of time that moved wrong. Too slow in the gaps, and then suddenly gone in the moments that mattered. She ran her scans every 12 minutes, logged everything in the notebook, drank 2 liters of water that Ferris brought up at 1400 as promised, and ate a second ration pack at 1600 without tasting it. At 1530, she found the observer, not on the ridge. That was the thing that made her stop and go carefully back over what she was seeing, because it wasn't where she expected it, and her first instinct was to assume she was misreading the terrain. She gave herself 30 seconds to doubt the observation. Then she looked again, and the observation held. Southwest face of the ridge, below the military crest, in a natural rock shadow that would have been invisible without the afternoon light hitting it at exactly the current angle. A figure prone, with what appeared through the scope to be an optic of significant size pressed to their face. Not pointed at the ridge. Pointed at the eastern OP. Pointed, she calculated with the cold arithmetic of her profession, at exactly where she was sitting. She did not move. Movement would confirm position. She sat absolutely still and looked through her own scope at the figure looking through their scope at her, and she thought about what she was seeing and what it meant and what her options were. The range was approximately 780 meters. Her current dope was set for 922. She could adjust. The shot was not difficult. Better angle than last night, better light, cleaner geometry. The wind was running at 6 kilometers, southwest, stable. She could take the shot. She had clearance from Kane for anything on the ridge showing hostile indicators. But if she took the shot, she confirmed her position in a way that a clean miss would also confirm, but in a worse way. And if the observer was alone, and she wasn't certain of that, taking him removed the observation but didn't tell her who he was reporting to or what they had already learned. She pressed transmit, kept her voice very flat. Eastern OP to command. I have a single observer, southwest face of the ridge below the military crest, prone position with optic. Range approximately 780. Observer appears to be focused on the eastern OP. Request guidance. Kane came back in 20 seconds. Copy. Eastern OP. Is the observer armed beyond the optic? Cannot confirm from current angle. Hold. She held. The figure did not move. She did not move. The afternoon light was dropping toward the west, which would eventually kill the angle that had revealed him, and she estimated she had 14 minutes before the shadow reclaimed that section of rock face. Eastern OP, this is actual. Kane's voice was measured. We want that observer alive if possible. Can you hold the position without engaging? Yes, but I have approximately 12 minutes before the light changes and I lose visual. Copy. Pierce is moving to the south face position. I want to know if there's a second element before we do anything. A pause. If the observer moves to leave, you're cleared to engage. If a second element appears with hostile indicators, you're cleared to engage. Otherwise, hold. Understood. She held. The figure in the rocks did not move in the first 3 minutes, did not move in the next 3. He was good. The discipline of stillness required to hold a prone observation position for that duration without adjusting was not something everyone had, and she noted it the way she noted all information about the person she was watching. At minute 8, he moved, not to leave. He shifted his optic slightly to the south, repositioning his focus to cover the south face approach. Someone had told him about the new OP position. She pressed transmit immediately. Eastern OP to command. The observer just shifted focus to the south face. He has current intelligence on our new OP position. Someone is feeding him real-time information. Silence for 2 seconds. Then Pierce, not Kane. Say again? The observer moved his optic to cover the south face within 8 minutes of us establishing the new OP there. Either he has a visual angle I'm not accounting for, or someone in this camp— She stopped, said it anyway. Or someone in this camp told him. The silence this time was different, longer, heavier. Kane's voice came back carefully controlled. Eastern OP, maintain observation. All other elements, radio silence except emergency traffic. Actual out. She looked through the scope at the figure in the rocks, the figure who knew things he should not have known, the figure who had moved his optic at exactly the right moment. The light was at 11 minutes and falling. She watched him and thought about what she was watching and felt the picture she had been building since yesterday morning shift into a shape she hadn't expected and didn't like. The attack last night had been too well timed. The positions had been too well chosen. The staging had occurred within coverage gaps that would only be obvious to someone who knew the coverage pattern. Not just good intelligence about the terrain, good intelligence about the outpost itself. She wrote in the notebook, Observer relocated focus to South OP within 8 minutes of establishment. Internal source possible. Flag for Kane. She underlined the last sentence twice. The light changed at minute 13. The shadow reclaimed the southwest rock face, and the figure disappeared into it as cleanly as if he had never been there. She swept the area 3 times, found nothing, and noted the loss of visual at 1544. She sat back from the scope. Her shoulder ached. Her eyes ached. The notebook was nearly full. She had been using it since the helicopter ride, and there were only 8 pages left. She thought about an observer in the rocks with a large optic and information he shouldn't have had. She thought about a camp of 31 people, where 29 were accounted for in her mental map of who knew what and when. She thought about which 2 she wasn't certain of, and she started writing on page 43. Pierce came to the Eastern OP at 1700. He came up the ladder with the particular speed of someone carrying something urgent, and he had the folder in his hand before he reached the platform. Regional ran a signals intercept at 1530, he said. He opened the folder. Printed text, sparse, raw intercept, not analyzed. Encrypted burst transmission from inside the valley. They've been trying to break it since it came in. She looked at the paper. Inside the valley or inside the ridge? Inside the valley, closer in. He pointed at the approximate grid reference. Inside the wire, possibly. She looked at him. I know, he said. Does Kane know? He's known since 1545. He's been running a quiet inventory since then. Who was where at what time? Who had radio access? Who had line of sight to the south approach before the OP was announced? Pierce closed the folder. He hasn't told anyone else. He doesn't want whoever it is to know they're being looked at. Smart. He also wants your read. She looked at the folder. My read on what? On who? Pierce set it on the equipment shelf. You've been watching everyone since you got here, not just the ridge. She had. She hadn't tried to make it obvious, but she did it automatically. The same way she read terrain, she read people, behavioral patterns, inconsistencies, the small things that didn't fit the profile of the role they were supposed to be filling. I have observations, she said carefully. Not conclusions. What observations? She looked at the notebook, thought about what she was going to say before she said it, because saying it made it real in a way that had consequences she couldn't fully see yet. 3 people in this camp have shown patterns that didn't fit their stated positions since I arrived. That might mean nothing. People behave strangely in the field, especially at the end of a long posting, but combined with what we saw at 1530, who? She looked at him. If I give you names and I'm wrong, those people carry that for a long time. If you're right and you don't give them to me, I know. She picked up the notebook, opened it to page 43, showed him what she had written. Not names, not yet, but behavioral notations against initials she had been using since day one. Give Kane these observations. Let him run the cross-reference against his inventory. If the pattern holds, you'll have a name by tonight. Pierce took the notebook and read carefully. She watched him read. His face didn't show much, but she had learned the language of it well enough by now to see when something landed. He looked up at her when he finished page 43. You wrote this at 15:45. Yes, an hour after you got here. I wrote the first entries on this page last night at 02:30. She took the notebook back. Before the attack. He stared at her. I didn't know what I was seeing yet, she said. I just knew something didn't fit. I wrote it down because writing things down is how I keep from losing track. Pierce stood on the OP platform in the late afternoon wind and looked at her with the expression of a man revising an estimate he had been carrying since yesterday morning. Is there anything about this situation you don't have a notebook entry for? Yes, she said. What? Whether the observer in the rocks this afternoon was the planner or someone working for the planner. She looked out at the ridge. If it was the planner, he took a risk coming that close. That tells me something about him. She paused. I'm not sure yet what. Pierce closed the folder and tucked it under his arm. I'll get this to Kane. Tonight, she said. Not tomorrow. Tonight, he agreed. He went down the ladder. She watched him cross the yard below, moving with the deliberate pace of someone carrying information that needed to get somewhere without looking like it needed to get somewhere. He was good at that. She had misjudged him early, not his competence, which had been evident, but his adaptability. She had expected him to stay in the position he'd taken yesterday and defend it. He hadn't. That was worth something. She turned back to the scope and began the 1,700 scan. The ridge was still. The valley below was moving into its evening shadow. The south face, where Marsh was running the new OP, was quiet, no visible movement. The camp below her was running its evening routines, watch rotation handoffs, mess prep, equipment checks. 31 people, reduced to 28 functional, 54 hours to exfil. The night coming in from the east, as it always did, without caring what had happened the night before. She found the notebook entry she had made at 02:30 the previous night and read it again. The initials, the behavioral notations, the small inconsistencies that had piled up in 6 hours of watching and hadn't resolved into anything she could name yet. She looked at the eastern ridgeline. Somewhere out there, the planner was watching her OP through a large optic and thinking about what he had seen. Somewhere inside this perimeter, someone had told him where to look. 54 hours. She opened the notebook to page 44 and began writing the 1,700 scan results in the same careful hand she had been using since the helicopter ride. Precise, unemotional, every observation dated and timed and stripped of anything that wasn't directly observable. The wind shifted at 1712, exactly as she had predicted. She noted it, added it to the column of things she knew. Turned to page 45. The shift change at 1800 brought Corporal Harkett to the base of the eastern OP ladder. He was 25, quiet in the unremarkable way of someone who hadn't yet decided what kind of soldier he wanted to be, and he carried his rifle with the slightly self-conscious grip of a person who was aware of being watched. He called up to confirm the handoff, and she told him she was staying through the second watch, which he received with visible relief. She could see it in the way his shoulders dropped a fraction. And then he went to take up the secondary position 30 meters south of her platform without arguing about it. She noted the relief in her notebook, not because it was unusual, because it was the third time she had seen that specific reaction from Harkett in 36 hours. The first time was at the morning assembly when Kane had announced the tightened watch rotation. The second was when Pierce had named the south face OP position in the afternoon briefing. Both times, Harkett had received news that meant more eyes on more terrain, and both times his body had responded with that same involuntary release of tension, the look of a man hearing something he'd been afraid wouldn't happen. That was the wrong response. A soldier who had been in the field for 5 months and was 54 hours from going home should respond to tightened security measures with impatience, not relief. The last thing anyone wanted 60 hours before exfil was more work and more exposure. Unless more security meant something different to Harkett than it meant to everyone else. She did not write his name in the notebook. She wrote the behavioral notation and the time and the context and underlined it once. Then she went back to the scope. Well, see, Kane came to the Eastern OP himself at 1900, which she had not expected. He climbed the ladder with the careful deliberateness of a man whose knees had opinions about heights, and he came up and stood at the rail and looked out at the valley for a moment before he spoke. Pierce gave me your notebook entries. I know. The initials. He looked at her sideways. I know who you mean. She waited. I've been running the cross-reference since 1600. He put both hands on the rail. The wind was picking up out of the northwest, the evening shift, and it moved his collar against his neck. The signal's intercept at 1530 triangulated to a source inside the motor pool area. That narrows the access window to 11 people who were in or near that location between 1500 and 1545. How many of those 11 overlap with the initials in the notebook? 1. She looked at him. I'm not going to name him yet, Kane said. I need one more piece before I can move on this. If I'm wrong, the camp is small and the morale is already at the floor, she said. I know. If I'm wrong, I've destroyed someone's service record over a bad triangulation and a behavioral pattern that a jury of peers would call circumstantial. He exhaled through his nose. But if I'm right and I wait too long, 53 hours, she said. Yes. She looked out at the ridge. The last light was leaving the upper face in long horizontal bars of gold that shrank as she watched. What's the one more piece you need? A second transmission. Regional is running continuous intercept coverage now. If it comes from the same source location, that's enough to act on. And if it doesn't come tonight? Then I watch the person in question and I make a judgment call. He paused. I wanted you to know the status. You brought it to me and you should know where it stands. She appreciated that. She didn't say so, but she thought he could tell. There's something else, Kane said. He reached into his jacket and produced a folded sheet, another regional intercept, this one analyzed, with a summary block at the top. He held it out. Came in at 1730. She unfolded it and read in the fading light. Regional Command Signals Unit had broken part of the 1530 burst transmission. Not all of it. The encryption was good, commercial grade, the kind that took time, but enough of it to extract a partial data string that their analysts had matched to a known format, a targeting package. Incomplete. Grid references with gaps, bearing data without the associated range information, a description block that had come through partially corrupted, but the structure was unmistakable. Someone inside Black Ridge Outpost had been transmitting a targeting package to an external recipient. She refolded the paper. This is what last night was missing, she said. What do you mean? The attack last night was accurate, but not precise. They hit the perimeter hard, but they didn't focus their fire the way they should have given the quality of planning that went into the overall operation. She handed the paper back. They were working from general terrain knowledge. Good general knowledge, but general. If they'd had a targeting package with specific internal coordinates, command post location, OP positions, generator, fuel, the attack would have been significantly more effective, Kane said quietly. Yes. She looked at the ridge. This transmission might be what they were missing the first time. If they receive a complete package before we exfil, I know. He folded the paper and put it back inside his jacket, which is why the second watch tonight is running completely dark. No unnecessary radio traffic, no external communications, nothing that gives a secondary source the opportunity to complete what the 1530 transmission started. She thought about this. Does the person you're watching know about the dark communications protocol? Not yet. Pierce is briefing it at the 2000 watch rotation. Watch the reaction, she said. In the room. Don't look for it. Just let it be there if it's there. Kane looked at her. You do this naturally, don't you? Do what? Read rooms. He said it without judgment, just observation. People. She considered the question honestly. I read what's there. Most people are broadcasting things they don't know they're broadcasting. You just have to be willing to look at what's actually happening instead of what you expect to happen. Kane was quiet for a moment. Is that something you learned or something you... I don't know, she said. Both, maybe. He nodded once, started for the latter, stopped. For what it's worth, Corporal, The after-action report I'm writing is going to be unambiguous about what your analysis identified and when. He looked at her steadily. I owe you that. And I owe Okonkwo's family a record that shows exactly what the failure looked like. She didn't have an answer for that. He seemed to know she wouldn't and didn't wait for one. The 2000 watch rotation briefing happened in the operations room. She wasn't in it. She was in the Eastern OP, where she belonged. But Marsh came up afterward with the evening coffee and a report on what she'd seen. Pierce told everyone about the dark communications protocol, Marsh said. She settled on the top ladder step, which had apparently become her spot. No external radio traffic, all internal comms on the secondary encrypted channel, nothing over the primary frequency until Kane clears it at 0600. How did the room receive it? Marsh wrapped both hands around her cup. Mixed. Ferris made a comment about it being overkill. Hendricks asked about the exfil coordination. How does regional confirm our status if we're not transmitting? Pierce walked him through the backup protocol. She paused. Harkett didn't say anything. Nora looked at the scope. Was that unusual for him? He usually asks questions in briefings. Small ones. Nothing important. But he's one of those people who asks questions, confirms things twice, makes sure he understood the schedule. Marsh drank her coffee. Tonight he just sat there. Did he leave directly after? He said he needed to check his gear for the 0100 watch. Went to the equipment room. Marsh looked at her. Is Harkett the... I don't know yet, Nora said, carefully. Don't assume and don't watch him differently than you watch anyone else. If you start treating him differently, he'll feel it. Okay, Marsh accepted this. What do I do? What you've been doing. Run the radio room the way you've been running it. Tight frequency checks. Log every transmission timestamp. She paused. And if anyone comes to the radio room tonight who isn't on the duty roster for it, you call me before you call anyone else. Marsh looked at her. Before Pierce? Before Kane. You call me first. 30 seconds. That's all I need. She picked up the scope. If I'm wrong, you call Pierce immediately after and tell him I'm being paranoid. Marsh almost smiled. And if you're right, then those 30 seconds will matter. Marsh finished her coffee and climbed down. Nora heard her footsteps cross the gravel, steady and unhurried. The walk of someone who was scared but had decided not to let it make her stupid. She had underestimated Marsh in the first hours after arriving. Not maliciously. She had filed her as background, as support element, as someone who would be useful in limited and specific ways. That had been a category error. Marsh was sharp, and she was practical, and she was the kind of person who, when given a clear role and a reason for it, executed without supervision. Nora noted this on page 45. Not because it was tactically relevant, because she had made an assumption, and the assumption had been wrong, and she kept track of those too. At 21:30, the camp settled into its night rhythm. The generator reduced to minimum load, lighting only, nothing else. And the temperature dropped with the darkness in the specific way it did at this altitude, fast and total, the cold coming from the ground up as much as the sky down. She had her jacket and her base layers, and the shooting discipline of keeping the body still meant the cold found purchase in her more slowly than it found most people. She ran her scans, logged the results, drank water. At 22:47, Marsh called. Not over the radio. She appeared at the base of the Eastern OP ladder and climbed it faster than she had climbed it before. And when she came up, her face in the OP's dim equipment light was holding something carefully controlled. Someone just accessed the radio room, she said. Who? I didn't see them go in. I came back from the South OP handoff, and the door was open. And the secondary console, she stopped. Someone pulled up the regional frequency, not the encrypted secondary, the primary, the one that goes out clean. Did they transmit? I don't know. I closed the door and came here. She looked at Nora steadily. 30 seconds. Nora was already moving. She keyed the radio on the OP's secondary channel, the encrypted one, and transmitted in a flat voice. Eastern OP to actual. Possible unauthorized radio room access, primary frequency, time now. Request you confirm radio room status. Kane came back in 11 seconds. Copy. Locking down the room now. Pierce is moving. A pause. Stay on your position. Understood. She looked at Marsh. You did the right thing. I don't know what I did. Marsh sat down on the equipment box, and for the first time since Nora had met her, the composure cracked slightly at the edges. Not enough to fall apart, but enough to show that holding it together was costing something. If it's who I think it is, don't think about who yet. Harkett has been on this post since month 1, Marsh said. I've had breakfast with him. He saved my spot in the mess line when I was running late on radio checks. She looked at her hands. I don't understand how someone does that. People compartmentalize, Nora said. It doesn't always look the way you expect it to. Did you know? When you first got here? Nora thought about the honest answer. I knew something was wrong with the picture. I didn't know what. She looked out at the ridge. I still don't know for certain. This could still be something else. But you don't think it is? No, she said. I don't. Marsh nodded slowly. She sat with it, whatever it was, and didn't try to make it into something more manageable than it actually was. That was a harder thing to do than it looked. Below them, the camp had changed texture again. She could feel it from the OP platform, the quality of the movement, the way the light shifted as people began to move who hadn't been moving before. Kane had locked the radio room. Pierce was moving. The machinery of consequence was in motion. She picked up the scope and went back to the ridge, because regardless of what was happening below her, the ridge was still out there. The observer from this afternoon was still out there. And the targeting package that someone had been building piece by piece over, she didn't know how many transmissions, didn't know how many shifts, how many careful, quiet moments in the radio room when nobody was looking. That package might or might not have been completed. She worked through the implications. If the package was complete and transmitted, the next attack would be different from last night in every way that mattered, more precise, focused on the specific locations that last night had failed to neutralize. The Eastern OP, the operations room, the generator, her position. She looked out at the darkness, and the darkness looked back and said nothing, which was what darkness always did. And she noted the wind at 2,255, 11 kilometers northwest, stronger than earlier, and adjusted her scope dope accordingly and kept watching. Pierce's voice came over the encrypted channel at 231. Oh, Eastern OP, this is Pierce. He stopped, started again. We have Harkett in custody. Kane's running the debrief now. She pressed transmit. What did the primary console show? Partial transmission? Regional is pulling it now. His voice was the flat kind, the kind that came after the adrenaline had settled and left something colder behind. He didn't get everything out. We don't know how much made it. Range data, she said. They'll need the range data to complete the targeting package. Did the transmission include range data? We don't know yet. Find out fast. If they have range data and grid coordinates, the next attack will be direct action on specific positions. Including this one. She paused. And Logan, yeah. How long has it been going on? A longer silence. Kane thinks since week 3 of the posting. Week 3. 14 weeks of slow, patient, invisible work. She thought about the attack last night. The precision of the staging positions, the timing against the watch rotation, the knowledge of the coverage gaps. Not just good intelligence about the terrain, 14 weeks of good intelligence about everything. Is he talking? She asked. Not yet. He will, she said, when Kane makes him understand that the alternative is being here when the next attack comes in. She lowered the scope for the first time in 2 hours and looked at the camp below her. He might not know the full operation. He might only know his piece of it, but he'll know the contact method and the handler and the transmission schedule. Kane knows that. Make sure Kane also knows that if there's a scheduled transmission Harkett didn't make tonight, the handler is going to assume something went wrong. That changes their timeline. She picked the scope back up. Whatever they're planning next, it just moved up. Pierce didn't answer immediately. She heard him relaying the information to someone, Kane probably, or someone close to Kane. Then, how much time do you think we have? She looked at the ridge. Dark, still, patient. The wind at 11 kilometers moving through the upper rocks in a low, continuous note she could hear even from the OP if she stopped to listen. 49 hours until exfil. a handler somewhere in the valley who had not received his scheduled transmission and was now running his own calculations. "Less than we had an hour ago," she said. She clicked off the transmit and settled back into the scope and found the upper ridge in the reticle and held it there, because that was the one thing she could control from where she was sitting, and she was going to control it as long as her eyes held and the darkness allowed. Page 46. Wind, 11 kilometers northwest, increasing. Time, 2318. Ridge, quiet. She wrote it all down and waited for what came next. The cold at 0047 was the kind that stopped being uncomfortable and started being structural. It got into the joints, into the small bones of the hands, and the only way to manage it was to stop thinking about it entirely and let the body do what it was going to do regardless. Nora had stopped thinking about it at 2330. She was on her fourth scan cycle of the upper ridge when the encrypted channel opened and Kane's voice came through with the particular compression that meant he had been awake for 20 hours and was running on something other than rest. "Eastern OP, we have a partial read on what Harkett transmitted." She kept her eye on the scope. "What made it out?" "Grid references on the operations room, the generator housing, and the Eastern OP." A pause that carried weight. "Range data on all three." She processed this without moving. "They have a complete targeting package on this position." "Yes." "And the handler knows the transmission was interrupted." "Regional is tracking a secondary signal from the valley. Different frequency, short burst, came in at 2341. They think it's a confirmation request." Harkett didn't answer it. "So the handler knows something went wrong at 2341. She did the arithmetic. "That's 90 minutes ago. If they're going to move before exfil, they'll want to do it while the night still gives them cover." She checked the sky through the gap in the OP roof. The moon was lower than yesterday, thinner. "They have maybe 3 hours of useful darkness left." "That's my read too." Kane's voice was flat and exact. "I'm repositioning 2 elements away from the eastern sector. I want the OP to look undermanned from the ridge." She understood immediately. "You're using it as bait." "I'm using what we have." He paused. "I need you to stay in that position, Corporal. I know what I'm asking." She looked out at the ridge, at the darkness that held whoever was out there making their own calculations. The targeting package had her grid reference in it. The next attack would open with whatever they had aimed at this position. "I need 2 things," she said. "Go. Marsh on the radio room with open line to me, and clearance to engage anything that moves on that ridge without waiting for confirmation. If I see it, I shoot it." "You have both." He clicked off. She picked up her notebook and turned to the last clean page and wrote the time and the wind and the range to the ridge crest, and then she set it down and settled into the rifle and waited. Pierce came to the base of the OP ladder at 0112 and called up without climbing. Kane briefed me. "Okay?" "I don't like it." "It's the right call. You're sitting on a position that's in a targeting package, and we're deliberately thinning the coverage around you." His voice had an edge she recognized, not anger, the thing underneath anger. "That's not a plan. That's a sacrifice." "It's an ambush," she said. "There's a difference." "Not much of one from where you're standing." She looked through the scope at the dark ridge. "Logan, if they hit the operations room and the generator and this OP simultaneously, the defensive perimeter collapses. We lose command and control, and we lose the one position with coverage on the ridge approach, all in the first 30 seconds. She paused. "The only way to stop that is to be ready for it. Being ready for it means being here." "I know the logic." "Then trust the logic." He was quiet for a moment. The wind moved through the camp below, shifting loose gravel against the motor pool wall. "Ferris is 40 meters south of you in the secondary position. You won't see him, and he won't interfere with your fields of fire, but he's there." She hadn't asked for that. She didn't argue against it either. "Tell him to stay below the rail until I call it." "Already told him." Pierce shifted at the base of the ladder. She heard him, but didn't look down. "Hale." "Yeah. You've been in that OP for 11 hours. "I know." "Your hand's cold?" She flexed her right hand once against the rifle stock. The cold had gotten into the knuckles. She could still feel the trigger. "I'm fine." He didn't say anything else. She heard him walk back toward the operations room, and then she was alone with the wind and the scope and the ridge. At 0158, the ridge moved, not the crest. The tree line below it, a section of the upper approach where the rock transitioned to sparse vegetation and the darkness was thickest. Something was pushing through the brush in a pattern that wasn't wind. She caught it on the sixth sweep, a series of micro-displacements in the upper branches of a scrub cluster that didn't match the ambient movement of the surrounding terrain. She held the scope on it and counted 3 separate disruption points, 10 to 12 meters apart, moving upslope in a staggered pattern, the specific spacing of people trained not to bunch, maintaining interval, keeping separation so that a single burst couldn't take all of them at once. Not 2 personnel this time. She pressed transmit. Eastern OP. I have movement in the upper tree line, northwest phase, 3 or more elements, staggered interval, moving upslope. This is the approach. Kane came back in 6 seconds. All elements stand by. Eastern OP is primary observer. Nobody moves until Hale calls it. She watched the movement. It was disciplined, slower than last night's approach, more careful, stopping for 30 seconds at a time before advancing. They had learned something from last night, or the planner had told them what to learn. She calculated the range to the upper tree line, 840 meters. She recalculated the wind, still northwest, but it had dropped from 11 to 7 kilometers in the last 30 minutes, the kind of shift that changed bullet drift at this range by a meaningful amount. She adjusted the scope turret 2 clicks counterclockwise. The movement stopped completely at 0 to 11. The 3 disruption points went still simultaneously, which meant a signal had been given. Someone was coordinating the approach, and that someone had called a halt. Waiting for something. She thought about what they were waiting for. A coordinating action. Something that was supposed to happen from inside the perimeter before they made their final push. A signal from Harkett that would never come. At 0214, someone in the approaching element apparently decided the signal wasn't coming and the timeline wasn't flexible. The tree line erupted. Not gunfire. Not yet. Movement. Fast and committed. 3 elements breaking from the upper brush simultaneously and pushing hard for the ridge crest. The discipline of the slow approach gone, replaced by the committed speed of people who had decided to execute regardless of the missing confirmation. She was on the first element before they cleared the tree line. Eastern OP engaging, she said into the radio. Ridge approach, northwest face, multiple elements. She fired. The first round went downrange at 0214 in 11 seconds. She cycled the bolt without watching the result. The motion was below thought, pure trained response, and shifted to the second element, which had changed direction the moment the shot broke, cutting hard to the left toward a rock formation that would give them cover on the approach. Smart. She had expected that. She led the movement and fired. The third element had gone to ground. She lost them in the brush for 4 seconds, which felt much longer, scanning in tight horizontal sweeps across the area where they had disappeared. The ridge crest lit up, not from the elements she had been tracking. From a 4th position she had not seen, a pre-positioned shooter who had been on the crest since before she started watching the tree line approach. The incoming rounds hit the OP's forward rail in a burst that sent fragments of metal and wood in every direction, and she went flat by reflex, pressing herself against the platform deck as the second burst came in and chewed through the corrugated roof panel above her head. The radio was screaming. Eastern OP is taking direct fire. Sniper on the ridge crest. I need... Element is moving on the motor pool. She was already moving, not retreating from the OP, repositioning within it, rolling left to the secondary shooting lane she had identified on day 1, a narrower angle that sacrificed 20 degrees of arc, but put the concrete OP pillar between her and the crest shooter's line of fire. She got behind the pillar. The next burst hit where she had been. She found the crest shooter in the scope from the new position. He was well placed, using the same terrain fold that last night's machine gun crew had used, but further west, a slightly different offset that avoided the exact angle she had engaged from the western OP 2 nights ago. He had studied what happened to the last crew and adjusted. She noted this with the part of her brain that never fully stopped working, even now. The shot from this position required her to lean past the pillar by approximately 8 inches to clear the OP framework. 8 inches of exposure. She calculated the geometry, his firing angle, her position, the distance, the time a bullet took to cross 860 meters at this altitude. She leaned out and fired and pulled back in a single motion. The incoming fire from the crest stopped. She was already back to the tree line. The third element she had lost was moving again. She caught them at the wood's edge. 2 figures now instead of the 3 she had tracked, pushing hard up the exposed slope below the crest with the commitment of people who had decided that the only direction left was forward. She engaged the lead figure, cycled, engaged the second. The slope went still. Her breathing was loud in her own ears. The radio was still going, multiple channels overlapping, and she sorted through it the way she sorted through scope images, looking for what was signal and what was noise, pulling the relevant threads out of the tangle. Motor pool element neutralized, 2 down. South face is clear. Marsh confirms. Operations room is solid. Kane confirms. Then Pierce, and his voice was tight in a way she hadn't heard before. Hale, we have a problem. She pressed transmit. Go. The element that hit the motor pool wasn't the main effort. Kane just... She heard him stop and restart. Regional is tracking a large secondary force on the valley floor. 15 to 20 personnel. They weren't in any of the pre-attack intelligence. They've been staged in the drainage system below the south approach. She went cold in a way that had nothing to do with the temperature. The drainage channel, the one she had told Marsh to watch on day 1. How long until they reach the wire? She asked. Regional estimates 8 to 12 minutes. They're moving fast. 15 to 20 personnel against a perimeter that had already taken casualties, with an eastern OP that had just been shot up and a south-face position manned by 1 radio operator and a rifle she had last fired 4 months ago. Where's Marsh? She said. South OP. She's... Pierce stopped. She knows they're coming. Kane told her 30 seconds ago. Nora looked at the south approach from the eastern OP wrong angle. She couldn't cover the drainage channel from here. The geometry didn't work. The channel mouth was directly behind the motor pool structure from her current position, masked completely. She was in the wrong place again. Logan? She was already calculating. From the eastern OP, I have no angle on the drainage channel mouth. I need to move. Kane said stay on the ridge. The ridge is neutralized. The threat is the south approach, and I can't reach it from here. Hale, where is the best elevated position with a south approach angle? She said it fast because she already knew the answer and she needed him to confirm it so she could move before the 8 minutes became 6. The motor pool roof, but it's exposed? Yes. What's the range to the drainage channel mouth from the motor pool roof? She heard him calculating. 450, maybe 480. Clean range, good light from the perimeter floods that were still running. She had rounds for it. I'm moving, she said. Kane said, tell Kane I'm moving and why. She was already picking up the rifle case with her left hand, notebook shoved into her jacket. He can reassign me back to the eastern OP when the secondary force is handled. She went down the ladder faster than was safe and hit the gravel at the bottom at a run. The motor pool was 30 meters across open ground, and she ran it without thinking about what the open ground meant, because thinking about it would have made her slower and slower was the thing she couldn't be. The perimeter floods gave the yard a flat yellow light that threw no useful shadows, and she was aware of being visible the whole way across, and chose to be aware of it without letting it do anything to her legs. She hit the motor pool wall and found the access ladder on the north face, a fixed iron thing bolted to the concrete, the kind that transferred cold through the palms, even through gloves. She went up it in 4 seconds and came over the roof edge into a low crawl and moved to the south parapet. The drainage channel mouth was at 460 meters. She could see it clearly. The perimeter floods were at the right angle, washing the lower approach in enough light to work with. She got behind the rifle. The first elements of the secondary force were already at the channel mouth. She could see them moving in the spill of the perimeter lighting. Disciplined movement, tight spacing, the trained kind. They were not the reserve element of a failed attack. They had been staged and waiting. The ridge assault had been designed to draw attention north while these people came from the south. 15 personnel. Maybe more behind them. She keyed the radio. Motor pool roof. I have visual on the secondary force. 15 confirmed. South approach. Drainage channel mouth. They're at the wire in 3 minutes. Kane came back immediately. All south-facing elements, this is actual. Eastern OP has visual on the secondary force. Hold the south perimeter. Marsh, report. Marsh's voice came back, and it was steady in a way that Nora registered as something genuinely impressive given what she was looking at. South OP copies. I have visual. Waiting on clearance. Cleared, Kane said. All elements cleared hot. Nora was already firing. The first shot broke the lead element at the channel mouth. Not the first figure she saw. The one behind him. The one who was carrying the shape she recognized as a breaching charge. She had learned which targets mattered first from people who had learned it the hard way. And a breaching charge at the wire was more dangerous than any individual shooter. Second shot. Third. She was moving through the scope in a sequence she was building in real time, not a pre-planned fire solution, because there hadn't been time for that, but a dynamic priority ranking that updated with each new piece of information the scope gave her. A squad leader calling movement with his hands. She recognized the gesture from 40 meters of scope magnification and put the round through the shoulder that was gesturing. 2 personnel breaking left for the motor pool wall. She engaged the nearer one, lost the second behind the vehicle hulk, found him again 4 seconds later when he came out the other side. Marsh was firing from the south OP single shots, measured, with the pacing of someone who was being careful about her round count. That was the right call given her ammunition situation. Nora heard it as a secondary beat beneath her own fire, and she calibrated her target selection to cover what Marsh couldn't reach from her angle. The secondary force hit the wire at 0231. Not all of them. She had reduced the number significantly in the approach, and the ones who reached the wire were already reacting to fire from 2 positions in ways that broke their formation. Broken formation meant no coordinated breach. No coordinated breach meant the wire held. For 4 minutes it was completely chaotic. She fired and cycled and fired, and once she had to relocate when a burst of incoming fire found the motor pool roof, and she moved 6 feet to her left without fully rising and found a new position behind the parapet lip and kept working. At 0235, the secondary force broke. Not orderly retreat, collapse. The trained discipline she had seen in the approach dissolved when the casualty count crossed whatever threshold the remaining personnel had calculated as unsustainable, and they went back down the drainage channel in the specific disordered way of people who had stopped thinking about the mission and started thinking about getting out. She tracked the retreat for 40 seconds and then held fire. Retreating personnel weren't the threat anymore. Whatever was still in the drainage channel was. South approach, she said into the radio. Secondary force is withdrawing. I count 7 to 9 personnel in retreat down the channel. Remaining elements from the original 15 are down in the approach. Copy. Kane's voice. He sounded like he was standing up straighter. South OP, confirm status. Marsh. South OP is intact. I'm okay. I think I'm okay. The way she said it, the hitch in the middle of it, the small fracture in the controlled voice, was the most human thing Nora had heard from anyone in 36 hours, and something in her chest registered it without her permission. You did the right thing, Nora said over the radio, and then clicked off because saying more would have made it into something that didn't belong in a radio transmission. She sat back from the rifle and looked at the south approach. The perimeter floods showed empty ground between the wire and the drainage channel mouth. The channel itself was dark. The retreating personnel were gone into the valley. She had 41 rounds fired across the last 17 minutes. She checked the remaining magazine without looking away from the south approach. 14 rounds left. She loaded a fresh magazine and sent the spent one into her jacket pocket. The radio traffic was sorting itself out into the post-contact pattern, sectors reporting, position checks, casualty assessments. She listened to it and built the picture of what was still standing. The operations room intact. The generator intact. The eastern OP damaged but structurally holding. Motor pool wall had taken hits, but the vehicles were functional. South perimeter wire intact. The outpost was standing. She sat on the motor pool roof in the flat yellow light and the wind off the northwest ridge and thought about what had just happened and what came before it, and the 7 days of careful, patient groundwork it had taken for someone to build an attack of this complexity. The staged secondary force, the pre-positioned crest shooter, the internal asset, the coordinated timing. And she thought about how none of it had worked, not because the plan was bad. The plan was genuinely good. It had accounted for almost everything. It hadn't accounted for her. She didn't feel satisfaction about that. She felt tired, which was more honest. Her right shoulder had a deep ache from the rifle stock, and her hands were cold enough now that the knuckles had gone from aching to numb, and she needed to do something about that before the next hour required them to work again. She flexed both hands slowly and watched the south approach, and waited for Kane to tell her what came next. Pierce's voice came over the radio at 0251. He didn't lead with a status report or a tactical update. He said, "You moved to the motor pool roof." "Yes." "Kane told you to stay on the eastern OP." "Kane told me to stay on the ridge. The ridge was neutralized. The threat moved." A pause. "He's not going to argue with the result." "I know. But he's going to put it in the report." "Good," she said. "Put it all in the report." She heard Pierce breathe once, slow. Then, 31 hours, Hale. 31 hours to exfil. The number sat in the dark between them with the specific weight of something that was close enough to see, but still far enough to go wrong. "I know," she said. She looked at the ridge to the north and the drainage channel to the south and the flat yellow light in between, and she thought about a planner who had now failed twice and had 31 hours and a reason to try again that was more personal than operational. She opened the notebook to the last page. Wind, 6 kilometers northwest dropping. Time 0253. Rounds remaining, 14 plus 1 full magazine. She wrote it all down and watched the dark and waited. The motor pool roof was cold enough by 0310 that the metal beneath her had stopped feeling like metal and started feeling like absence. Just a flat nothing under her elbows and knees that happened to be solid. She had been in position for 40 minutes since the secondary force broke, watching the drainage channel and the south approach, and occasionally sweeping back to the ridge, out of habit. And in those 40 minutes, nothing had moved except the wind, which had dropped further. Sitting now at 4 kilometers out of the northwest, almost nothing. Almost nothing was the worst wind for this work. It made shooters overconfident about their corrections. She noted it in the notebook and kept watching. Kane came to the motor pool at 0318, not over the radio, in person, which told her something about what he wanted to say. She heard him on the ladder and didn't look back until he came over the parapet edge and crouched beside her. He looked at the south approach first, then at her, then at the rifle. "How many rounds did you fire from this position?" he said. 41, across the 2 contacts. "Total for the night?" 48. He was quiet for a moment. "I told you to stay on the eastern OP." "Yes, sir." "You moved without clearance." "I moved and transmitted simultaneously. You had real-time awareness." He looked at her with the expression of a man deciding how much to make of something. "The after-action is going to show a corporal relocating a primary fire position without explicit command authorization." "Yes, sir, it is. It's also going to show that the relocation was tactically correct and that the south perimeter held because of it." He paused. "Those 2 things are both going to be in the report, exactly as they happened." She looked at the drainage channel. "Understood. I'm not going to pretend I'm not relieved about the result," Kane said. "But I need you to understand that in a different situation, under different command, moving without authorization could get you pulled from an operation entirely." "I know that." "Do you?" She looked at him directly. "I've been pulled from operations for less." She paused. "And the operations I was pulled from went worse." Kane held her gaze for a moment. Then he looked back at the south approach. "The debrief starts at 0500 in the operations room. I need you there." "I'll be there." He went back to the ladder, stopped with one hand on the parapet. "Hale, the secondary force. How did they stage a 15-person element in the drainage channel without our surveillance picking it up?" The drone coverage pattern has a 12-minute gap on the south quadrant during the camera rotation cycle. Someone who knew the schedule could move a staged element into the channel during that window. She looked at him. Harkett had access to the surveillance schedule. Kane's jaw tightened. It was the only visible response. "I'll have regional confirm." He went down the ladder. She turned back to the south approach and kept watching. Shut. The debrief convened at 0500 in the operations room with 7 people present. Kane at the head of the table, Pierce on his left, Ferris and 2 other squad leaders whose names she had learned but whose faces she was still mapping to context, Marsh in the corner running the recording equipment, and Nora in the chair that nobody had explicitly assigned to her but that everyone had apparently decided she should have, which was the chair directly across from Kane. Harkett was not present. Harkett was in the equipment room under guard, which was all she knew and all she needed to know for the next hour. Kane opened without preamble. 2 contacts in a single night. The outpost is intact. We have 4 wounded, 2 from the first night and 2 new from tonight's contacts. The secondary force from the south approach, regional, is now counting 11 confirmed down in the approach corridor. The remainder withdrew down the valley. He put both hands flat on the table. We have 28 hours to exfil. What I want from this debrief is simple. What we know, what we don't know, and what we do about it before wheels up. He looked at her. She had organized what she wanted to say during the 40 minutes on the motor pool roof. Not formally. She didn't work from notes in a debrief, but she had run it through enough times to know the shape of it. The two attacks were parts of a single operation, she said. The first night was a test of our defensive response. The second was the main effort, designed around what they learned from the first. She looked around the table. They had internal intelligence, Harkett's transmissions, and they had an external observer who watched this post for at least 2 days before the first attack. What they didn't have was an accurate picture of what was covering the ridge. Because you weren't in the picture they were building, Pierce said. Because I wasn't assigned to a position where I could affect the ridge until after the first attack. When Kane moved me to the eastern OP, they adapted. The pre-positioned crest shooter tonight was a direct response to what I did on night 1. Different offset, different approach, designed to neutralize the counterfire that had hurt them before. Ferris leaned forward. So they studied you. They studied the effect and tried to account for it. That's not the same as studying me specifically. She paused. But it means someone out there is capable of rapid adaptation. 2 attacks in 48 hours, both incorporating lessons from the previous failure. That's not a static threat. You think there's a third attempt, one of the squad leaders said. Corporal Vesper, she placed the name now, the one who ran the motor pool detail. I think there's a planner who has invested significant resources in this operation and has not achieved his objective. 28 hours is a short window, but it's not nothing. Kane looked at the map wall. What is the objective? They had to know we were evacuating. Whatever they wanted to accomplish before we left. What was it? She had been thinking about this since night 1. Not destruction. If the objective was casualties, both attacks were executed wrong. Too much resource devoted to the ridge and the south approach, when a simpler concentrated assault on the perimeter would have caused more damage. She looked at the map. The targeting package Harkett transmitted. Operations room, generator, eastern OP. Those aren't targets you hit to cause casualties. Those are targets you hit to create chaos and disable command and control. So they wanted to overrun the post, Pierce said. They wanted to take someone out of it, alive. The room went quiet. Kane looked at her. Who? I don't know. You're the most likely command target, but the targeting package included the eastern OP, which is a sniper position, not a command position. That's specific. She held his gaze. I don't know what I represent to the operational picture out there, but someone made sure my grid reference was in the package. Pierce's jaw worked. So they wanted to capture or eliminate you? Possibly. Or someone nearby wanted to ensure I wasn't a factor in whatever comes next. She looked at the table. I'm flagging it. I don't know what to do with it beyond that. Kane was quiet for a long moment. Then, Pierce, what's the status on the ridge? Regional ran a thermal pass at 0400. No active signatures. The approach trail shows evidence of the attempted assault, but no current occupation. Pierce pulled a printed image from the folder in front of him. There's one thing. He slid it across the table toward her. Regional flagged it, southeast face of the ridge, below the military crest. She picked it up. Thermal imaging, the same type as before, but this pass was sharper. Cleaner atmospheric conditions at 0400 than the earlier passes. There was a single signature on the southeast face. Stationary, small, a person prone in the same general area where she had watched the afternoon observer 24 hours ago. Someone was still out there watching. After 2 failed attacks and at least 11 personnel down in the south approach, someone was still watching. She set the image down. He didn't leave. Regional thinks it's been there since before the second attack. Kane looked at the image. The signature is too small for crew served. Single individual. The planner, she said. That's our read. She looked at the image for another moment. The thermal signature was patient and still in the way that people who were very good at this were patient. And still. Not because they were waiting for something to happen, but because they had accepted that waiting was itself the work. She recognized it because she did the same thing. He's running his own assessment, she said. He watched both attacks. He knows what stopped them. He's deciding what to do about 28 hours. Can you reach that position? Kane asked. She did the geometry from memory. Southeast face, below the military crest, the approximate location from the thermal image relative to the ridge profile she had memorized on day 1. From the eastern OP, possibly. The angle is difficult. There's a rock formation on the southeast face that creates a partial mask at that elevation. I'd need better positioning data than a thermal image to confirm a firing solution. Regional can run a higher resolution pass at first light. First light is 0612. She looked at the clock on the operations room wall. 90 minutes. Can you hold the eastern OP until then? Yes. Kane nodded once. Debrief over, on that topic at least. He looked around the table. I want consolidated perimeter coverage from now until exfil. Nobody operates solo. Every position runs with a minimum of 2 personnel. Vesper, you're on the motor pool detail with Hendricks. Pierce, you're running the OP rotation personally. He paused. Marsh. Sir? Marsh looked up from the recording equipment. You did good work tonight. The South OP held because of your decision to stay in position. Marsh didn't smile. She nodded, which was exactly the right response, and told Nora something about how the night had changed her. Kane closed the folder. 28 hours, clean exfil. That's the mission. Dismissed. Hut. She went back to the eastern OP at 0520. The camp was moving around her in the gray pre-dawn light, with the specific efficiency of people who had stopped having feelings about their situation and started having tasks instead. It was a functional coping mechanism. She had used it herself. Ferris fell into step beside her as she crossed the yard. Can I ask you something? He said. You're going to anyway. The south approach last night, motor pool roof. How many rounds did you fire before the force broke? 41 from that position. In how long? 17 minutes. He walked beside her for a few steps without saying anything. I was on the eastern perimeter during the second contact. I could hear you firing from the motor pool. Single shots, very fast, very regular. He paused. It didn't sound like someone who was scared. I was scared, she said. He looked at her. Being scared and performing scared are different things, she said. One of them is information. The other is noise. She looked ahead at the eastern OP. I had 41 rounds to work with, performing scared waste rounds. Ferris absorbed this. Where did you learn to shoot like that? 4th Recon. Before that, somewhere else. Somewhere else. Before Recon. He waited to see if she'd continue. She didn't, immediately. They reached the base of the OP ladder, and she stopped and set the rifle case down and looked at him. She had not told anyone here what came before 4th Recon. It wasn't classified exactly. It was the kind of information that existed in her service record, but that she had never volunteered in any posting, because the moment she did it changed the nature of every conversation that followed. People either became deferential in ways that made working relationships awkward, or they became skeptical in ways that made them worse. But Ferris had been on the eastern perimeter last night. He had seen what he had seen, and he was asking an honest question without the performance of judgment he had arrived with. Before 4th Recon, I was with a long-range precision unit that doesn't have a standard designation, she said. 2 years. Most of what we did I can't describe in a debrief. Some of it I don't fully understand the context of even now. She picked up the rifle case. The shooting you heard last night is what 2 years of that kind of work produces. Ferris looked at her steadily. How many people know that about you? In this camp, now you and Kane. She started up the ladder. Kane read my full jacket yesterday morning, after the first contact. He didn't tell Pierce? That's between Kane and Pierce. She went up the ladder and heard Ferris stand there at the bottom for a moment before he walked away. She didn't look down to see what expression he was wearing. It didn't change anything about the next 90 minutes. Pierce was at the eastern OP when she arrived, which she hadn't expected. He was standing at the north rail looking at the ridge with the spotting scope she had left secured to the platform mount. He didn't look up when she came over the top of the ladder. Kane told me, he said. She set the rifle case down. When? After the debrief. He asked me to come up here. Pierce lowered the scope. He said I should hear it from him before I heard it from someone else. She moved to the shooting position and began setting up without responding. Long-range precision unit, no standard designation, Pierce said. 2 years. Yes. That's a specific kind of posting. Yes. I've been in this uniform for 12 years, he said. I've heard about units like that. I've never met someone who came out of one. She adjusted the scope dope for the dawn conditions. Temperature drop overnight had changed the air density slightly. A small correction, but a real one. Now you have. How old were you? 22 when I went in. 24 when I came out. What happened at 24? She looked through the scope at the ridge. I came out. Pierce set the spotting scope down on the rail and turned to look at her properly. She could feel it without seeing it. You're not going to tell me more than that. No. Fair enough. He picked up the spotting scope again. For what it's worth, and I know it's not worth a lot at this point, if I had read your jacket on day one the way Kane did after the first contact, the conversation at the Western OP would have gone differently. Maybe, she said. Not maybe. Logan, even with the jacket, you were going to push back. It's how you're built. She found the southeast face of the ridge in her scope and started working toward the area flagged in the thermal image. You push back and then you adjust. It's slower than I'd like, but it's not a character defect. He was quiet for a moment. That's a generous read. It's an accurate read. She moved the scope carefully across the southeast face. You adjusted after the first contact. You adjusted during the second, both times in the right direction. That matters more than the initial position. Okonkwo and Fairbanks would argue with that assessment. She stopped moving the scope. Yes, she said. They would. She let that sit where it was. Pierce didn't try to move it either. At 6:12, the sun cleared the eastern terrain and the first clean light hit the ridge face in the specific flat way of early direct sunlight that rendered the terrain in high contrast. Every shadow sharp, every rock formation distinct. She had been waiting for this light for 90 minutes, and she used it immediately, sweeping the southeast face in careful horizontal passes from the base up. She found him at 6:19. Not a thermal signature this time. The actual figure prone in the rock shadow below the military crest, using the shade of a large formation to mask himself from direct observation from the camp. He was still there. He had been there through both contacts and the debrief and the pre-dawn hours, watching. She looked at him for a long time before she said anything. There was something about the position that was different from what she expected. He was using a shooting mat. She could see the edge of it in the shadow. Not an observation platform. A shooting mat, and the object pressed to his face was not the large observation optic she had seen in the afternoon. It was something more compact, something that was also a weapon. He wasn't just watching, he was waiting for a shot. She pressed transmit. Eastern OP to actual. I have the individual from the thermal image. Southeast face, same location. He's not observing. He's in a shooting position with what appears to be a precision rifle. Kane came back in 10 seconds. Copy. Range? She had already calculated it. 960 from my current position. Angle is tight. The rock formation on the southeast face partially masks the target. I have a firing solution, but it requires me to shift the platform position north by approximately 4 feet to clear the mask. Can you make that shift without being seen? Not in current light conditions. He has an observation angle on this OP. She paused. He knows where I am. He's been watching this post since yesterday afternoon. Then he's waiting for you to show. Yes. Pierce had gone very still beside her. She could feel it. Options, Kane said. I can wait for him to shift position and take the shot when the mask clears naturally. That could be minutes or hours depending on what he's waiting for. She looked at the figure in the rocks. Or I move fast enough that the shot I give him isn't the one he's planning for. Explain. He's expecting me to be behind the scope, on this platform, at the position I've occupied for 2 days. If I move the platform north and acquire him before he reacquires me, I have a window. She calculated the time. 4 to 6 seconds. The shift, the acquire, and the shot. 4 to 6 seconds with a tight angle against a precision shooter who knows you're there, Pierce said quietly. Not over the radio. Directly to her. Her. Yes. And if your firing solution through the mask is off by the margin that the uncertain angle introduces, then he gets his shot, and it's a better one than mine. She looked at the figure, at the 960 meters of ridge face between them, at the rock formation that was the difference between a shot she was confident in and a shot she wasn't. I know the math. What do you want to do? Kane said. She looked at the figure for another 3 seconds. He hadn't moved. He was good at stillness. She had acknowledged that yesterday, and it was still true. He was patient in the same way she was patient, and that told her something about who she was looking at and what he had done before this operation, and why 2 complex attacks against a hardened outpost had come so close to working. I want the regional high-resolution image, she said. If I can confirm the exact position relative to the rock formation, I can refine the solution before I move. Regional can have it in 8 minutes. Tell them 6, she said, and tell them I need the southeast face only, maximum resolution, current timestamp. Kane went off the line to relay it. Pierce stood beside her and looked at the same southeast face she was looking at with the spotting scope at his eye, and neither of them said anything for a moment. You've done this before, Pierce said finally. Counter-sniper. Direct engagement. Yes. How many times? She thought about it, not calculating, remembering. Enough that I stopped counting after the 4th. How did they go? I'm here, she said. Pierce lowered the spotting scope. He looked at her profile. She could see him doing it in her peripheral vision. You're not nervous. I'm nervous? You don't look it. I told Ferris this morning, performing scared waist rounds. She adjusted her grip on the rifle. Being scared is information. Right now it's telling me the angle is tighter than I'd like, and the window is shorter than I'd like, and the target is more capable than the personnel from either contact. She paused. That's all useful. The regional image came through at 0626. Marsh relayed it over the encrypted channel as a verbal coordinate set. The radio couldn't transmit images, but the analysts had broken it into a grid reference description that gave her what she needed. Southeast face, the formation she had identified, was a 2-part structure with a gap at the upper right corner, and the figure's position was using the left portion as his primary mask, which meant the gap was on his right side, which meant if she shifted north, she wasn't trying to clear the whole formation. She was threading the gap. The shot through the gap was longer. It added angular complexity. It was also cleaner than she had been working with before because the gap had a defined edge she could use as a reference. She built the solution in her head in 90 seconds. I have it, she said. Have what? Pierce. The shot. She looked at the gap in the rock formation from her current position, then looked at where it would appear from 4 feet to the north, held both images in her head simultaneously. I'm going to move. When I do, I have approximately 5 seconds before he reacquires me in his scope. I need you to do something. What? Stand up, she said. When I move north, stand up at this position, full height. Give him something to look at that isn't me shifting. Pierce looked at her. You want me to stand up in front of a precision shooter. At 960 meters for 3 seconds. He's going to take a moment to identify what he's seeing and decide whether it's the target he's waiting for. She met his eyes. That's the window. Pierce was quiet for 3 full seconds. She counted them. Then he said, Tell me when. She got her feet under her, checked her grip, ran the solution one more time. Angle, range, wind at 4 kilometers from the northwest, the gap in the formation, the figure in the rocks who had been patient for 2 days and was about to find out that patience had a counter. Now, she said. Pierce stood up. She moved north along the platform in a low, fast lateral that covered 4 feet and 2 steps, dropped into position, found the gap in the scope with the ingrained speed of someone for whom the scope was an extension of the eye and not a tool she was operating, and she looked through the gap in the rock formation on the southeast face of the ridge at 960 meters, and she found him. He had moved. Not much. A fraction. The instinctive shift of someone who had seen unexpected movement and was reacquiring. He was moving his optic from Pierce's standing figure back toward the northern position she had just left. He had not found her yet. She fired. The shot was not clean. She knew at the instant it broke. The trigger had gone a half-pound too fast, the adrenaline in her hands making the pull slightly abrupt, and she felt the minute deviation in the break and tracked it mentally and knew it had gone slightly high and left of the center. High and left at 960 meters through a formation gap. She cycled the bolt. The figure in the rocks had moved. She found him, lower, flatter, a fast drop into better cover that told her the first round had not connected cleanly. She was already on the second shot. She fired. This one she felt correctly. The brake was right. The follow-through was right. She held the scope on the position. The figure did not move again. She stayed on the position for 45 seconds. 45 seconds of complete stillness from both of them. Then she took her eye from the scope and sat back and looked at the sky, which was fully light now, blue and cold and indifferent as it always was. "Eastern OP to actual," she said. Her voice came out flatter than she expected. "Target on the southeast face is down. Request regional confirmation when their next pass allows." Kane's response came back immediately. "Copy. Good shooting." Pierce sat down on the platform beside her. He had come down from his standing position the moment she fired the first shot, and he had stayed low, and now he sat with his back against the north rail and looked at nothing in particular. "2 shots," he said. "The first one was off." He moved. "Yes." She looked at her hands. The knuckles were still cold. He was good. Fast reaction to the unexpected movement, but not fast enough. "No." She flexed her right hand slowly. "Not quite." Pierce was quiet for a moment. How close was it? She thought about the half-pound of too fast trigger pull, about the figure dropping into better cover before the second shot, about the 5-second window that had been closer to 3. "Closer than I'd like," she said. Pierce leaned his head back against the rail and closed his eyes for a moment. She watched him do it and thought about what it had cost him to stand up on that platform for 3 seconds. He had done it without hesitation. She wanted to say something about that, but couldn't find the shape of it. 26 hours, he said, without opening his eyes. "Yes." "Tell me we're going to make it." She looked at the southeast face of the ridge, at the still position in the rock shadow below the military crest, at the gap in the formation through which she had threaded a round at 960 meters on 2 hours of sleep and 48 hours of accumulated cold. "We're going to make it," she said. She didn't say it to comfort him. She said it because she had run the math and it was the most likely outcome, and she was going to make it true through whatever the next 26 hours required. Pierce opened his eyes. He looked at her. Then he nodded once and picked up the spotting scope and went back to work. She turned back to the rifle. 26 hours. The camp below was moving, people doing tasks, the machinery of survival and exfil preparation running in parallel. Somewhere in the operations room, Kane was writing reports that would outlast all of them. Somewhere in the equipment room, Harkett was sitting with whatever he was sitting with, which was his problem now and not hers. The ridge was quiet. The south approach was empty. The sky was fully light and cold and clear. She opened the notebook to the last page and drew a line under the final entry, turned it over and used the inside back cover. Wind 4 kilometers northwest, stable. Time 0641, 26 hours. She wrote it and underlined it once and kept watching. The regional confirmation came at 0718. Single individual, southeast face, grid reference, matching the thermal signature from the overnight pass. Inert. The analysts used that word, inert, in the specific clinical way that meant they had confirmed what she already knew, but needed the paperwork to say it. She wrote the confirmation time in the notebook and closed it. The notebook was full. Every page used, including the inside back cover where she had written the last entry 40 minutes ago. She had gone through notebooks before. It happened on long postings, on extended operations, but there was something different about this one being finished here, on this platform, with 26 hours left on the clock. It felt like a unit of something completed. She put it in her jacket pocket and kept her eye on the ridge. Pierce left the OP at 0730 to run the watch rotation handoff. Before he went down the ladder, he stopped and looked at her for a moment with the expression she had learned to recognize as him deciding whether to say something. "What?" she said. "Nothing." He started down. "I'll send Ferris up with food. I'm not hungry." "I'll send him up anyway." He descended. She heard him cross the gravel below, and she went back to the scope, and the ridge was empty, and the south approach was empty, and the sky was the clean, high-altitude blue that came after cold nights when the atmosphere settled into clarity. 26 hours. Ferris came up at 0800 with a ration pack and 2 cups of coffee, and the look of someone who had been awake for too long and had stopped pretending otherwise. He handed up the food and the coffee and sat on the equipment box rather than the ladder step, which meant he intended to stay for a while. She didn't object. She had been alone on the platform for long enough that the company, even quiet company, was something different from nothing. Regional confirmed the southeast position, he said. I know. Kane's writing the supplemental report now. The contact, the counter-sniper engagement, all of it. He drank his coffee. He said the individual on the ridge was carrying documentation. They found it in the pass after the overnight thermal. She looked at him. What kind of documentation? Operation plan? Detailed. Phases, contingencies, alternate approaches. Ferris turned the cup in his hands. Kane said whoever wrote it had been planning this for at least 6 weeks, maybe longer. 6 weeks. The posting had been 5 months. Harkett had been sending transmissions since week 3. Someone had been building toward this for more than a month, and the operation had come within a missed transmission and a 4-foot platform shift of succeeding. Did the documentation name the target? She said. Ferris looked at her steadily. You, specifically. By name, by role, by the fact that you were incoming as a reinforcement. He paused. Someone knew you were being assigned here before you did. She sat with this. The ration pack was open on the platform beside her, but she hadn't touched it. That's in the report? Kane's putting everything in. He said he owes it to the record. Ferris looked at his coffee. He also said something I thought you should hear directly. What? He said the after-action from the first 2 nights already showed that your threat assessment on day 1 was accurate in every particular. The village patterns, the ridge geometry, the timeline, all of it. He paused. He said he was writing a formal commendation and that he wished he'd had the experience to recognize what he was looking at when you first put it in front of him. She didn't say anything immediately. She looked at the ridge and thought about what a formal commendation meant in the context of what the 3 days at Black Ridge had actually been. It meant something, and it meant nothing in equal measure. Tell him to write what happened, she said finally. Accurately, that's worth more than a commendation. He's doing both. She picked up the ration pack and started eating. It still didn't taste like anything, but her body needed the fuel, and she gave it what it needed. Ferris stayed for 20 minutes without saying much else. When he left, he took the empty cup but left the second coffee, which she drank cold at 0900 while running her scan cycle, and she thought that was a small but genuine kindness and filed it accordingly. The morning passed in the specific way that the final hours of a long operation passed, both slowly and too fast simultaneously, the clock moving at a pace that felt wrong in both directions. She ran her scans. She logged her observations. The ridge stayed empty. The south approach stayed empty. Regional ran 2 additional passes and found nothing active in the surrounding terrain. At 1100, Kane came to the eastern OP for the second time. He climbed the ladder with the same careful deliberateness as before, and came up and stood at the rail and looked at the ridge for a moment before he spoke. 14 hours, he said. Yes, sir. Regional has confirmed the operation is disrupted at the command level. Without the individual on the southeast face, the remaining elements in the valley don't have a coordinating authority. He looked at her. We're not going to take a third attack. Probably not, she said. You don't want to say definitely. I don't say definitely about things I can't control. He almost smiled. It didn't quite form, but the intention of it was there. The supplemental report is done. Pierce has reviewed it. I want you to read it before I transmit it to Regional. Sir, you don't need my... I want you to read it, he said. Not for approval, because you should know what the record says about what happened here before it leaves this post. He held out a folded document. She took it. It was 7 pages, single-spaced, the dense factual language of military after-action reports that she had read enough of to move through quickly. She read it on the OP platform while Kane stood at the rail and looked at the valley below. It took her 11 minutes. The report was accurate. That was what struck her most. Not the commendation section, not the formal language of recognition, but the simple accuracy of it. The timeline of her threat assessments and the command responses to them. The decisions made and the decisions not made, and the consequences of both. The first contact, the second contact, the counter-sniper engagement at 0619, the role of Harkett's transmissions in enabling the attacks, the role of her analysis in limiting the damage. It didn't soften anything. It didn't reassign blame to make anyone look better than they had been. It said what happened, in the order it happened, with the names attached to the decisions and the outcomes attached to the names. She folded it and handed it back. It's accurate, she said. Good. He put it inside his jacket. There's something else. He turned from the rail to face her directly. Regional Command reviewed the preliminary report this morning. The section on your background took the unit designation, the prior posting, generated some interest at a level above regional. She looked at him. I don't know the details, he said. I received a communication this morning asking for confirmation of your service record and your performance in this posting. That's all they told me, and I passed on what I know. He paused. I thought you should be aware. Thank you, sir. Do you know what that means? The interest from above regional? Possibly, she said. And? She looked at the ridge. And I'll find out when they tell me. Kane looked at her for a moment longer. You're not curious? I'm curious about a lot of things, she said. Whether someone above regional is interested in my service record is pretty far down the list right now. He nodded slowly. What's at the top? She thought about it honestly. Whether Rusk still has full function in his left hand when they finish with him at the surgical facility. Kane was quiet. And whether Marsh is going to be okay, she said. The South OP last night, she held it, but that kind of thing changes people. Sometimes in good ways, sometimes not. You're concerned about her. I'm paying attention to her, she said. There's a difference. Kane looked at her for another moment with the expression she had come to recognize as him recalibrating something he had thought he understood. He did it without embarrassment, which she respected. I'll check in with her this afternoon. Don't make it official, she said. She'll close up if it feels like an assessment. Just talk to her. Noted. He moved to the ladder, stopped. Corporal Hale. For the record, and I mean that literally, since I'm still writing things down, I made the wrong calls on day 1 and day 2 of this posting. I had the information I needed, and I didn't act on it correctly. That's on me, and it's going to stay on me. He looked at her steadily. But I want to say something that's not going in any report. She waited. The way you handled being dismissed, not just by me, by Pierce, by half the soldiers on this post, and you kept doing the job anyway. You kept watching the ridge and running the calculations and writing in that notebook, and you didn't let any of it make you smaller. He paused. That's not something they teach. I don't know where it comes from, but it's the reason we're having this conversation instead of a much worse one. She looked at him. She didn't have a clean response to that, and she knew it. Go write your reports, sir, she said. He went down the ladder. Pierce found her at 1400 doing her last full scan cycle before the afternoon wind shift. He came up the ladder and handed her a bottle of water and sat on the equipment box without being asked. Harkett talked, he said. She kept her eye on the scope. When? This morning. Kane ran the debrief himself. Pierce looked at his hands. 14 weeks of transmissions. Started small. Schedule information, supply run timing, nothing that could cause immediate harm. Then it escalated. He paused. He said it started because of a debt. Money. Someone found the debt and used it. Is that true? Kane thinks it's partially true. There might be more to it. Regional will continue the investigation after we exfil. He looked at the floor of the platform. He's 25 years old. I know how old he is. He had breakfast with Marsh every morning for 4 months. I know that too. Pierce was quiet for a moment. Does it change anything? The reason? She lowered the scope and looked at him directly. Okonkwo and Fairbanks are still dead. Rusk still has frag in his shoulder and his leg. Whatever reason Harkett had, the outcome is the same. She paused. It changes how I think about what made him vulnerable. It doesn't change what his choices cost. That's a hard line. It's a clear one. She went back to the scope. He's 25 and he made choices that killed 2 people he ate breakfast with. He's going to have to carry that. The reason doesn't lift it. Pierce exhaled. I know. He stopped. I keep trying to find a version of it that makes more sense. It doesn't make more sense, she said. It just is what it is. He sat with that. The afternoon wind was starting its shift. She could see it in the movement of the sparse vegetation on the lower ridge face, the early edge of the southwest to northeast reversal she had predicted on day 1, and that had been running exactly as predicted every afternoon since. Pierce, she said. Yeah. You stood up on that platform this morning. He said nothing. 3 seconds at 960 meters against a precision shooter. You did it without hesitating. She kept her eye on the scope. I want you to know that I know that." He was quiet for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was careful in the way of someone making sure what comes out is what they mean. "You told me to, and I trusted you. Most people would have hesitated anyway. Most people aren't trying to make up for 2 nights of bad calls." She moved the scope slowly across the upper ridge face. "That's not why you did it." "No," he said, after a moment. "It isn't." He stayed on the equipment box for another 30 minutes, not saying much, watching the terrain she was watching. It was the most comfortable silence she had experienced in the 3 days she had been at Black Ridge, which wasn't saying much given the 3 days, but it was real. At 16:30, Marsh came to the Eastern OP for the first time since the South contact. She climbed the ladder with the slightly deliberate pace of someone whose body was still processing the previous night, and she came up and stood beside the rail and looked south toward the drainage channel below without speaking. Nora watched her in peripheral vision and said nothing. Marsh stood there for almost 2 minutes. Then, "I keep seeing it." "I know. Not the contact itself, just the approach. The way they move down the channel." She kept her eyes on the south terrain. "I see it when I close my eyes. I see it when I'm looking at something else." She paused. Is that going to stop?" Nora thought about the honest answer. "Eventually. The timeline is different for everyone. Some people it's weeks, some people it takes longer." She paused. "The seeing it when you close your eyes part. That's the brain doing what brains do with high-threat events. It's running the scenario over and over because it's trying to find a version where the outcome changes. It doesn't change. No, but the brain doesn't know that yet. You have to give it time to accept what happened and file it correctly." Marsh turned to look at her. "How do you do it? You've been doing this for years. How do you make it stop?" "I don't make it stop," Nora said. "I let it run when it runs. I don't fight it. And I do the next thing that needs doing, because doing the next thing is what tells the brain that the threat is over and it can stand down." She paused. "You held the South OP last night. You were scared and you stayed anyway. That matters." "I was terrified," Marsh said. "I was so scared I couldn't feel my hands." "I know." "How could you possibly—" "Because I could hear it in your voice on the radio and you still made the right calls." Nora looked at her. "That's not nothing. That's actually the definition of what it looks like to do this right." Marsh turned back to the south approach. She stood there for another minute. "I put in for a field role," she said, "before this posting, 6 months ago. They put me in the radio room instead." She paused. "I was angry about it at the time." "And now?" "I don't know." She thought about it. "I think I needed the radio room first. I needed to know the communication side before I could hold a position like last night without falling apart." "You didn't fall apart." "I came close." "Coming close and falling apart are different things." Nora looked at the south approach. "You should put in for the field role again, after this posting." Marsh looked at her. "You think I should?" "I think you're better at this than you know, and someone should be telling you that, so I'm telling you." Marsh was quiet for a moment. Something on her face shifted. Not dramatically, just the small internal adjustment of a person receiving information they needed. "Okay," she said. She stayed another 5 minutes and then climbed down. Nora heard her cross the yard and the door of the operations building open and close. She turned back to the scope. The exfil window opened at 0600 the following morning. The helicopters were inbound from T-4, which meant they would arrive at 0200 for the staging sequence, and the first lift would go at 0600 sharp. Priority evacuation first, the wounded, the priority personnel, then equipment, then remaining personnel in 2 subsequent lifts. The final 12 hours passed in the way final hours always did, with the specific unreality of time running out on something that had been consuming all available attention, the sensation that the end was both too soon and not soon enough. She stayed in the Eastern OP until 2200. There was nothing to find in the scope anymore. Regional had confirmed the surrounding terrain was clear, the valley approaches were empty, whatever remained of the operation that had targeted Black Ridge had dissolved without its command element. But she stayed anyway, because staying was the job until someone told her the job was done. Kane told her at 2200. He came to the base of the ladder and called up. "Stand down, Corporal. Get some rest before the 0200 staging." She came down the ladder for the last time. She stood at the base of it for a moment and looked up at the platform. The corrugated roof with the hole the second burst of fire had punched through it, the north rail with the impact marks from the same burst, the shooting position she had occupied for the majority of 72 hours. She picked up the rifle case and walked to the main building. Gesen. She did not sleep. She lay on the bunk in the room she had been assigned on day one and had barely used, and she looked at the ceiling and let her brain run what it was going to run. She had told Marsh to let it run. She took her own advice. At 01:30, she got up and went to the equipment room. Harkett was there. 2 guards, the room's single overhead light, Harkett sitting on an equipment crate with his wrists secured and his face carrying the specific look of someone who had been living in the consequence of their choices for 12 hours and was only beginning to understand how long that was going to continue. She hadn't planned to go there. She was going to the supply room next door to return a piece of ranging equipment she had borrowed from the OP stores, but she passed the equipment room door and she stopped. The guards looked at her. 2 minutes, she said. They looked at each other. She had enough informal authority in this camp at this point that they stepped back without being told to by someone with more rank. She looked at Harkett. He looked at her. He had the eyes of someone who hadn't slept either, but for different reasons. Not the operational alertness that had kept her awake, but the churning, inescapable kind of wakefulness that came from the inside. He looked younger than 25. He also looked older. "I know who you are," he said. His voice was flat. Not hostile, just empty. "I know you do. The report has your name in it, and what you did, and what it cost." She paused. "That's how it should be." He looked at the floor. "I didn't know it was going to—" He stopped. "What did you think it was going to do?" "I thought we were leaving. I thought by the time anything happened we'd be gone and nobody would—" He stopped again. His jaw worked. "I know that's not an answer." "No," she said. "It isn't." He looked up at her. There was something in his face that was trying to find something to say that would change the shape of what had happened, and she could see him not finding it. "Okonkwo used to leave candy on Ferris's bunk," she said. "Ferris told me." Harkett's face changed. It wasn't dramatic, just the small collapse of someone hit by a specific weight they hadn't braced for. "I know," he said quietly. "He did it to me too." "I know." They looked at each other for a moment. She didn't feel anger at him. She had thought she might, standing here, but what she felt was closer to the specific exhaustion that came from understanding how a person could make a series of choices that each seemed survivable individually and then suddenly weren't. "You're going to have a long time to think about it," she said. She picked up the ranging equipment she had come for and walked out. The first helicopter arrived at 0207, right on the regional timeline. She stood at the edge of the landing pad with her rifle case and her duffel bag and watched it come in the same way the one that had brought her had come in. Low, fast, kicking grit across the pad in a brown spiral. Rusk was in the first lift. He was on a stretcher, his left side immobilized, and he was conscious and pale, and he saw her when the medics carried him past the pad edge. He looked at her with the expression of someone who had done a lot of thinking in the last 48 hours. "Hale," he said. She looked at him. "I'm sorry," he said, "for what I said when you got here." She looked at him for a moment, at his face, which was honest in the way that pain made people honest, stripped of the performance. "Don't die," she said. He almost smiled. "That's it? That's enough. Don't die." The medics moved him past her, and she watched them load him, and the helicopter rose and moved off into the pre-dawn dark. Pierce was beside her when she turned back to the pad. She hadn't heard him approach. "He's going to keep the hand," Pierce said. "Surgeon at the regional facility already reviewed the imaging. The shoulder is more complex, but the hand is going to be okay." She exhaled through her nose. "Good." "You asked Kane about it." "On day 2, yes." Pierce looked at her sideways. "You asked about Rusk, who had been mocking you for 6 hours. He was going to be in my sector of responsibility for 72 hours. Of course I asked." She watched the landing pad. "His status was relevant operational information." "Is that the reason?" She thought about the honest answer. "Mostly." Pierce made a sound that was something between a laugh and something else. "You're not going to make this easy, are you?" "Make what easy?" Admitting that you give a damn about people who are idiots to you. She looked at the ridge one last time. The sky was beginning to change in the east. The same preliminary light she had watched on the second morning from this same general position, the absence of the deepest dark that came before actual dawn. It was never about them, she said. It was about the job. The job that kept 30 people alive. 28, she said. Okonkwo and Fairbanks. Pierce didn't say anything. She hadn't expected him to. The second helicopter came in at 0440. Marsh was in the second lift group, and she found Nora at the pad edge before boarding with the specific purposefulness of someone who had decided to do something and was going to do it before the moment closed. I'm putting in for the field role, she said, when I get back. Good. I mean it. I already wrote the request. She pulled a folded paper from her jacket. I wrote it at 0300. I want a witness. Nora looked at the paper, then at Marsh. You don't need a witness for a role request. I know. Marsh held it out anyway. Nora took it, read it, folded it, and handed it back. You listed the South OP action in the supporting experience section. Kane said I could. You should. Marsh put the paper back in her jacket. She looked at Nora with the directness she had had from the beginning, the quality that had made her useful and that nobody had been paying enough attention to before this week. Thank you, she said, for what you said yesterday, on the OP. I said what was accurate. I know. That's why it helped. Marsh paused. Most people comfort. You just tell the truth. The truth is usually more useful. Yeah. Marsh glanced at the helicopter. The rotors were running and the loadmaster was gesturing for the boarding group. Take care of yourself, Hale. You too. Marsh went. Nora watched her board and the helicopter rise and diminish into the blue-black sky. She was in the last lift group. 7 personnel, the final equipment load, and Kane. They staged at 0540 and she walked the perimeter one last time. Not the full circuit, just the eastern OP, the motor pool, the south approach. Not because she needed to check anything, because she had spent 3 days learning this terrain and the habit of a last walk was one she had developed somewhere she didn't fully talk about. From people who had taught her that you looked at a place properly both when you arrived and when you left. The eastern OP was empty. The scoring on the north rail from the second contact's incoming fire was clearly visible in the morning light, the hole in the corrugated roof, the equipment box where Pierce had sat and Marsh had sat and Ferris had brought bad coffee and good water. She looked at it for a moment and then walked to the motor pool. The motor pool roof was 4 meters of flat concrete she had crossed at a run in the dark while a precision shooter was waiting for her, which was a sentence she had not fully processed in the hours since. She processed it now, standing at the base of the access ladder, looking up at the parapet edge. The perimeter floods were off in the morning light, and the roof looked small and ordinary and completely indifferent to what it had been the setting for. She went up the ladder and stood at the south parapet and looked at the drainage channel. Empty. The morning light showed the approach in the flat clarity of post-dawn, and she could see where the brush was disturbed at the channel mouth, where feet had moved through it in the dark. She stood there for 2 minutes. Then she went down. Kane was at the landing pad when she arrived. Ready? He said. Yes, sir. He looked at her for a moment. The communication from above regional. I expect you'll hear from them within the week. I'll handle it when it comes. I'm going to recommend you for a specific role in my supplemental communication, he said. Not the commendation, a recommendation. You'll recognize it when you see it. She looked at him. Sir, it's not a favor, he said. It's an accurate assessment of capability going to the people who need accurate assessments. He picked up his kit bag. You can argue with me about it on the helicopter if you want. She didn't argue with him on the helicopter. The final lift went at 0607, 7 minutes behind the scheduled window, because the loadmaster had a weight distribution issue that took 4 minutes to resolve, and then Pierce dropped his kit bag off the cargo net, and it took another 3 to retrieve it, which was the most human thing that had happened in 72 hours, and she was grateful for it in a way she couldn't have explained. She sat against the port side bulkhead and watched Black Ridge Outpost diminish through the cargo door gap as the helicopter climbed. The perimeter, the motor pool, the eastern OP platform with its damaged roof. The south approach, empty in the morning light. The northeast ridge, clean and still, the rock formations on the southeast face catching the early sun. She watched it until the terrain swallowed it, and there was only the high valley, and then only the mountains, and then clouds. Pierce was across from her in the cargo bay. He looked at the same window she had been looking at after it had become just sky. He had the expression of a man who had finished something and was still figuring out what to do with his hands now that it was done. Ferris was 2 seats down. He was asleep before the helicopter reached cruising altitude, which told her more about the last 72 hours than anything he could have said. She opened the rifle case on her knees. Not to do anything with it, just to check the content, the same post-operation habit as the last walk of the perimeter. The rifle, the scope mounts, the tool roll, the compact camera with the photographs of the ridge markings from morning one, the empty notebook she kept as a spare, still bound with the rubber band she had put on it 6 months ago at the start of the previous posting. She took the spare notebook out, removed the rubber band. She wrote the date, the location, the departure time. Then she wrote, "Ridge was empty when we left." She looked at the words, added, "That was the job." She put the notebook back in the case and closed the latches and leaned her head against the portside bulkhead and closed her eyes and let the vibration of the rotors do what it did, which was make thinking optional for a little while. She thought anyway, because she always did. She thought about Okonkwo, who she had never spoken to directly but whose coffee habit Marsh had told her about and whose candy habit Ferris had told her about, and who had existed in a complete way that 2.5 days had not been long enough to fully learn. She thought about Fairbanks, whose face she had seen twice, and whose name she had only connected to a face from the duty roster. She thought about Rusk, who was going to keep his hand, and about what the surgeon's report would look like, and whether the shoulder was as manageable as Pierce had suggested. She thought about Harkett, about the specific face he had made when she said Okonkwo's name. That face was going to stay with her in the way that certain things stayed. Not controlling, not overwhelming, just present. A reference point. A reminder of what the stakes of this work actually were, which were not tactical objectives, but people who left candy on bunks and made coffee before anyone else was awake. The helicopter flew northeast. The mountains below were enormous and indifferent and beautiful in the way of things that had been there a very long time and would be there long after all of the events of the last 72 hours had been filed and closed and become part of the record that nobody read unless they needed to know exactly what had failed and what had not. She had been in this uniform for 4 years. She had been in positions similar to this one, not identical, because no two postings were identical, more times than she could number cleanly. And in most of them there had been a version of the same first day, the same assessment, the same low-grade dismissal that didn't bother to disguise itself. She had learned not to be surprised by it. She had learned not to let it make her loud. She had learned that the best answer to being underestimated was the same as the best answer to most things. Keep doing the job, do it correctly, and let the results speak in whatever language the people around her could hear. It was not a philosophy she had arrived at easily. There had been versions of her that wanted to say the right thing at the right moment and prove something through argument rather than through work. Those versions of her had existed, and they had been exhausting, and they had been wrong. The work was the answer. It had always been the answer, not because the work vindicated her in a way that felt satisfying. Sometimes it didn't feel like anything except tired, but because the work was the thing that was real. The threat assessment was real. The ballistic calculation was real. The ridge was real, and the people who needed to come home were real, and the rifle in the case on her knees was real. And when everything that could go wrong started going wrong, the real things were all that mattered. Kane was watching her from across the cargo bay. Not intrusively, just the kind of looking that happened when someone was thinking about something and their eyes found a place to rest while they did it. She met his gaze. He nodded once, a small movement, and looked away. Ferris was still asleep. Pierce had his eyes open now and was looking at the ceiling of the cargo bay with the expression of someone who was not looking at the ceiling, but at something further away. Marsh was in the helicopter ahead of theirs, she calculated, the second lift. She would land 20 minutes before the final group, and she would be at the regional facility when they arrived, and Nora thought she would find Marsh in the first 20 minutes after landing because there were a few more things she wanted to say that hadn't been said yet. Not comfort, just truth, which Marsh had said was more useful. The helicopter descended toward the regional facility through the clear morning air, and below her the mountains resolved into lower terrain and then into roads and structures and the ordinary geography of a place that people lived in without being shot at, which was most of the world most of the time, and which she was going to be in for approximately 48 hours before someone somewhere put a new assignment in front of her. She was going to sleep first. A real sleep, horizontal, in a room with a door that closed, for as many hours as her body was going to take, regardless of what she thought about it. Then she was going to read whatever came in from above regional. Then she was going to decide. That was enough to know for now. The landing gear came down. She felt the change in the rotors and the shift in the deck angle, and she closed the rifle case latches one more time and picked it up with her right hand and her duffel with her left, and she was ready when the wheels touched. The cargo door opened. The morning air came in, lower altitude, warmer than Black Ridge by 8 degrees, she estimated, and she stepped out into it and walked across the tarmac and didn't look back. The people who had laughed when she stepped off the first helicopter 3 days ago were not laughing now. Some of them were sleeping in medical facilities. Some of them were going to spend a long time carrying what the last 72 hours had cost. Some of them would be okay. Some of them were going to take longer than okay. All of them were alive. That was the job. It was enough. People will judge you by what they expect to see. The only answer that lasts is showing them something they can't explain away. Not through words, not through anger, but through the work you do when nobody is watching and everything is on the line.